Recording in progress.
All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to day last. While we did knock off some items earlier in the meeting, we still have a pretty full morning here. I know that some folks have flights they want to catch, and by folks, I mean me. So we'll get started right away. I'll first turn to Executive Director Merrick Burden to see if there are any announcements.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and council members. Just a couple of things to be mindful of. Like you indicated, we do have a relatively full day. C7 may take a little bit more time than we are accustomed to. And then we have checkout time in the hotel is noon. Usually we have a break to organize folks and provide a chance for checking out. Those are two things to keep in mind as we think about the balance of our day.
All right, very good. Well, I'll turn to Deputy Director Kelly Haynes to give us the overview on C7.
Good morning, and thank you, Chair Guralnick. This is agenda item C7, membership appointments and adjustments to council operating procedures. Under this agenda item, the council considers administrative appointment issues regarding the council's membership roster, as well as any modifications necessary to the council's operating procedures or COPs. Relative to council members, designees, and members, the council received a letter from Pacific States Marine Fishery Commission Executive Director, Mr. Barry Tom, identifying Mr. Chris Oliver as his primary designee. Mr. Oliver has been at the table all week, so should be a familiar face to you all. That letter is provided to you in attachment 1. Chair Guralnick has also appointed Mr. Oliver to the Legislative and Budget Committees. The council received a letter also from the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife Director, Mr. Kurt Melcher, informing the council of revisions to his designee list, which includes replacing Dr. Karin Braby and adding Mr. Mike Harrington. That is attachment 2, and Mr. Harrington was here for our marine planning agenda item. The council received a letter from the National Marine Fisheries Service West Coast Region announcing the selection of Ms. Jennifer Kwan as the regional administrator. That can be found in attachment 3. Chair Guralnick has appointed Ms. Corey Ridings to the Legislative Committee. Relative to council advisory body appointments for the 2022-2024 term, the council recently solicited nominations for the vacant commercial troll position on the HMSAS, formerly held by Mr. Wayne Heikela, and received 2 nominations. One from Mr. Clayton Wraith, which was provided to you as closed session attachment 1, and the second as Mr. Jake McMaster as closed session attachment 2. For council advisory body agency appointments, the enforcement consultants, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife Law Enforcement Division requested that Assistant Chief Eric Cord be replaced by Captain Jason Krause as CDF&W's appointed member to the EC. That is in attachment 4. Furthermore, CDF&W requests Lieutenant Scott Cohen be specified as CDFW's designee for Captain Kraus. For the groundfish management team, the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife nominated Mr. Christian Heath to the ODFW position on the GMT. Those materials were closed session attachment 3, and under closed session, you heard from the SSC regarding Mr. Heath's appointment. For remaining vacancies, the following positions were advertised from February to May 2023, and no applications were received. The council should provide guidance on next steps and a call out if you're online and you're interested in these steps, in these positions, please do apply. We have the Coastal Pelagic Species Advisory Subpanel Commercial position, 1 vacancy. We have the Ecosystem Advisory Subpanel Washington at Large position, 1 vacancy. Additionally, we received 2 resignations from the Groundfish Advisory Subpanel. Those resignations were from Mr. Jeff Wilmarth. He resigned from the Oregon Charter Boat position on the GAP, and also from Ms. Ruth Christensen, who resigned from the Trawl at Large position on the GAP. We are actively soliciting nominations for those positions, and you will be considering those nominations at your upcoming September council meeting. Relative to ad hoc committees, the council's ad hoc Marine Planning Committee was established in 2021 to engage in the marine planning process for offshore wind and aquaculture opportunity areas. The council anticipated the MPC would be in place for at least 2 years, and we've hit that 2-year mark at this meeting. So under this agenda item, the council should consider whether to renew the MPC and whether there are any necessary changes to the committee's structure, function, or membership. Lastly, at the April council meeting, the council formed an ad hoc Equity and Environmental Justice Committee, and representatives have been named to that committee as follows. Mr. Joe Oatman as a tribal representative, Ms. Heather Hall representing WDFW, Ms. Krista Svensson as the Oregon Obligatory, Mr. Virgil Moore for the Idaho Department of Fish and Wildlife, Ms. Corey Ridings, California Obligatory, and Ms. Maggie Summer from the National Marine Fisheries Service. For council operating procedure changes, the council should consider updates to COPs 1, 2, 3, 4, and 6 to reflect our current hybrid meeting practices for public comment registration, motions, and voting procedures. These are really just housekeeping edits, if you will, to reflect our current process. The council should also consider additional steps to promote a respectful and harassment-free work environment. Attachment 6 contains the staff recommended measures, including proposed COP updates, along with a summary of council advisory body and tribal comments from March 2023. Under this agenda item, the council should identify measures for implementations and any necessary next steps. Council action under this agenda item is as follows. I will note that we have had a few things that have arisen during the course of the meeting, and I'm going to highlight those as I walk through the expected council actions. 1, appoint a nominee to the commercial troll position on the HMSAS. 2, appoint the ODF&W nominee to the GMT. 3, direct any necessary action to solicit nominees for the CPSAS commercial position and the EAS Washington at Large position. 4, renew the MPC, including consideration of whether any changes to committee structure, function, or membership are warranted. 5, and this is the new one, consider council representation on the Klamath River and Sacramento River Work Group. 6, appoint the council chair and vice chair for the August 11, 2023 to August 10, 2024 term. That is also an addition since the situation summary. Number 7, consider adopting the proposed changes to COP 1, 2, 3, 4, and 6 to reflect current practices in a hybrid meeting environment. And 8, consider additional measures to promote a respectful and harassment-free work environment, provide guidance on next steps. There are lots of reference materials in your briefing book. I just want to highlight the supplemental reports that have come in. We have a supplemental SSC, STT, SAS, and Habitat Committee report. Be happy to take any questions on the situation summary. And if there are no questions, I'm going to provide a brief presentation and a summary on the materials contained in attachment 6.
All right, let's first see if there are any questions. I'm not seeing any hands, so please proceed.
Thank you. All right, I will get started as Sandra is pulling up the PowerPoint. Thank you, Sandra. Just to start off with a little bit of background and history on the development of attachment 6. During much of 2022, the Council Coordinating Committee discussed matters of harassment in the council environment. The result of that discussion was the creation of what we had previously called the CCC harassment policy, which was developed in coordination with NIMS headquarters and NOAA General Counsel. During those discussions, the councils were encouraged to adopt the CCC policy as their own. Recall, in March 2023, the council adopted that CCC policy. We relabeled it. It had a very long title, so we call it our Harassment Procedures Policy. That policy is now available on our website for anyone to see. Also included in the March council meeting materials were staff recommendations for defining a respectful work environment. Those same recommendations are provided for you here today at the June council meeting. I do want to take this time to thank Ms. Heather Hall, Ms. Lynn Mattis, and Mr. John Ugeritz for providing me with their state policies and procedures related to these matters. Additionally, I want to thank the leadership of the West Coast Region, Northwest Fisheries Science Center, Southwest Fisheries Science Center for providing me with the NIMS policies and also feedback on the policies developed by council staff. General Counsel Northwest also provided a thoughtful review of our recommendations. In March 2023, the council had some discussion of these staff recommendations and also the recommendations in the tribal report and the advisory body reports. The outcome of those discussions was an offer for any interested council members to meet with Merrick and I to provide feedback in advance of the June council meeting, where you're scheduled to consider additional steps. I'd like to thank Ms. Krista Svensson, Ms. Corey Writings, and Ms. Lynn Mattis for taking the time to meet with us, review materials, and provide feedback. So at this meeting, the action is to consider additional measures and provide guidance on next steps. Here's a brief summary of the council staff recommendations for a respectful workplace that I'll be going through in detail in the next slides. Council operating procedures. The current council operating procedures allow the council to remove members of their advisory bodies based on just cause, including violations of marine resource regulations, felony convictions, and reports of sexual harassment or rude and disruptive behavior. The current COPs allow the council to remove members who violate kind of the behavioral expectations when such behavior occurs between the council staff assigned to the committee and the panel members. Staff recommend that the council consider editing the COP to expand protections for all council participants as noted in the track changes on the slide. So the intent here is that anyone who is in a meeting room should have an expectation to be treated respectfully. And if a member of one of our committees violates that matter, the council can consider removal. In March, the advisory bodies that reviewed these recommended COP edits supported them. The next staff recommendation is with regard to enhancing the intent to serve form. When members are appointed to our council advisory bodies, they are asked to sign an intent to serve form. This is our opportunity to be clear about the expectations of behavior we expect from our advisory body members. I do want to take a minute to read this one because I think it has some important language that is intended to set the tone of the meetings that we host. The statement would read, I agree to follow the process and procedures outlined in the council operating procedures and harassment reporting procedures. I commit to promoting an environment that encourages mutual respect, promotes civil discourse, and is free from all forms of harassment and discrimination at council-sponsored meetings. I understand that as a member of a council advisory body, I'm expected to conduct myself in a professional manner when on council-funded travel and when attended council-sponsored meetings for the duration of such travel and meetings, including when the meeting is in recess. One thing I want to highlight about this statement is it focuses on council-sponsored meetings. The expectation is that these criteria would apply whether you are online or in person. In March, the advisory bodies that commented on this proposal were in support of the recommended edits. Ground rules. Ground rules might also be thought of as a code of conduct for advisory bodies. The staff recommendation was that one set of ground rules would apply to all advisory bodies, so there was consistency in operations and expectations. Such consistency would also be helpful for members of advisory bodies that collaborate with each other or for other individuals in attendance at the meetings. It is very common for public meetings to establish ground rules to set the expectations. We reviewed ground rules that other organizations have implemented, including a WDFW advisory body handbook and ground rules that CDFW had established for a fishery advisory committee meeting. These particular ground rules that staff recommended were based on a document from the U.S. courts called Setting Ground Rules, Civil Discourse and Difficult Decisions. Most of the advisory bodies that comment on this issue in March supported committee-specific ground rules, while the Coastal Pelagic Species Management Team recommended universal ground rules. The Ecosystem Work Group agreed with the ideas presented in the ground rules, but did not see a need for advisory bodies to develop their own, separate from the COP and other policies surrounding harassment and other inappropriate behavior. The EWG did note that if the council was interested to adopt the ground rules, to the next slide, they had a recommendation to split bullet C into 2 points as noted on this screen, basically making a difference between the expectations for the committee members versus those in attendance. Next slide. The next staff recommendation was for committee operational guidelines. Here at the council table, you all follow Robert's Rules of Order, which is a very formal way of operating business. However, our advisory bodies operate in a much less formal environment. But that is not the case in all council arenas. For example, in the North Pacific, their advisory subpanel follows Robert's Rules of Order. We discussed kind of the unique operations in the Pacific Council and noted that that sort of formality was not something that we thought would work well in our process. However, we did think that it would be important for our committees to document how they do business. This would be one way of ensuring that all council participants understood the committee norms, and we also felt that it would help demystify the council process. It may have been many years for some of us around the table, but the first time you come into this process, it can be very daunting. You go into the SSC, for example, and they're very formal. They have rapporteurs, they have specific committee assignments as they move through agenda items. But then you might move to a different committee where there is much less formality. And so we thought it would be important for the committees to have some ownership and express how they like to conduct their operations. We thought such committee operational guidelines could be posted on the committee's website that we host. It could be linked on their agendas, so it's clear to anyone who enters the room or follows their discussions that they have an expectation of what those committee norms are. We also thought it would be important that these committee operational guidelines be reviewed and revisited by the committee as necessary. And particularly when a chair or vice chair is elected to a committee, they might want to make sure that those operational guidelines reflect how they like to do business. Harassment. At the March Council meeting, the Council adopted the harassment reporting procedures, which expressly prohibit retaliation. Upon further review, staff noted that the same language in the harassment reporting procedures should also be included in the Council operating procedure. So this would be the addition to that Council operating procedure, the red text at the bottom. Next. In March, the Council had a discussion that was focused around the tribal report that was presented, which was also supported by many of the advisory bodies that commented. An excerpt and a very light summary of the tribal report was a recommendation to provide examples of harassment, provide diversity in reporting, and provide clarity on the response to harassment reports. Additionally, the Council discussed anonymous reporting and third-party reporting. So again, just to recap, Council action for today: consider additional measures to promote a respectful and harassment-free work environment. Specifically consider the staff recommendations to modify the Council operating procedures, enhance the intent to serve form, establish ground rules that would apply to all committees, and then establish committee-specific operational guidelines. Additionally, the Council should consider next steps. I would recommend that you consider the reports that were provided to you in March, including the tribal report, as well as the supplemental reports that have been provided for you today under this agenda item. And with that, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Great. Thank you very much, Kelly, for the presentation. Let's see if there are any questions, and I will have discussion on this later, but any questions on the presentation or the overview? Phil Anderson.
I'm not sure this is the appropriate time to ask this question. It pertains to one of the slides.
Go ahead. Yeah.
The slide labeled number 1, Council operating procedures. That one. Was wondering if there was any discussion or we've heard any recommendations. This has to do with the third bullet. The word repeatedly fails too. Eliminating the word repeatedly and simply says fails to adhere. I think there are circumstances where second chances are appropriate, and there's some others where second chances aren't appropriate. So if it states that the behavior has to occur more than once, depending on what it is, I'm just wondering if there was any thought about removing the word repeatedly.
Through the chair, Mr. Anderson, I am not aware of any of those discussions. However, I think it is a very valid point you raise.
Okay, thanks.
Further questions on the overview or the presentation? And I'm not seeing any hands. Thank you, Kelly. So we'll move into reports now. We have a number of reports from council bodies. First, we'll go to the SSC and Dr. Dan Holland.
Thank you, Chair Grelnick. I'd like to read, I'm Dan Holland, Chair of the SSC. I'd like to read Agenda Item C7A, Supplemental SSC Report 1, SSC Committee Report on Membership Appointments and Council Operating Procedures. The SSC reviewed and discussed the report recommendations for respectful and harassment-free workplace. The SSC is supportive of efforts to address the issues of appropriate conduct and formalize these policies. The SSC has the following recommendations. The SSC strongly recommends that the Council consult experts in workplace law, human resources, and sociology, for example, and review the literature on best practices in prevention of response to harassment. Other organizations, including those involved in council activities, have existing guidelines and policies in place, as well as experienced staff to implement these. Experts' input throughout the process is the best way to ensure the council policies are comprehensive and consistent with currently accepted norms. For example, academic institutions have experience distinguishing between academic free speech and inappropriate behavior. NOAA Fisheries has a national program office for equal employment opportunity and diversity that can offer support or services or resources. Further, several organizations have publicly available guidelines for review. Consulting outside experts on the development and application of codes of conduct is important because participants in the council process may not be knowledgeable enough to develop effective policies. There is a risk of causing more harm than benefit if best practices are not followed. Also, personnel who are part of existing organizational management structures may not be the best suited to understand how to better include communities and individuals that are currently underrepresented. Effective training is essential to harassment prevention. This training should ensure that council participants are aware of and comprehend the council policies, and at a minimum include unconscious bias, bystander intervention, and effective reporting of inappropriate behavior. Training for council participants that would investigate reports of inappropriate behavior is also necessary. Unconscious bias training helps to promote a more inclusive meeting for all involved in the council process. Bystander intervention training would equip meeting participants, especially meeting chairs, with the tools to identify and effectively deal with inappropriate behavior as it happens. Training on reporting procedures would encourage individuals who experience or observe harassment to come forward by reducing uncertainty on how to report. Training on reporting procedures would also make it more likely that participants effectively document behavior and provide the response team with the information it needs. Training on how to investigate reports of inappropriate behavior would ensure that investigations are fair and effective. The specifics of the reporting process and outcomes of investigations should be better defined and documented. Neither the PFMC harassment procedures policy nor agenda item C7A attachment 6 includes specifics of what information will be communicated to the parties involved, such as whether the reporter's claim was substantiated by the response team, what information will be made public, who will see non-public information, or expected timeframes for resolution. Further, while that PFMC harassment procedures policy clearly states that the council will not tolerate retaliation against those who report harassment, neither the consequences for retaliation or how reporters will be protected is specified. The SSC recommends that there be a common set of ground rules for conduct rather than separate ground rules for each advisory body or meeting. This will allow for a consistent set of expectations for conduct and appropriate interactions among those participating in council activities. Language at the top of page 2 in agenda item C7A attachment 6 should be changed from on funded council travel to council-related travel or other council-related activities to ensure that code of conduct applies to all council participants in online or in-person settings. The SSC recognizes the need for a process for anonymous reporting for accusers who do not feel comfortable talking to the points of contact at the council. Anonymous reporting would help the council track patterns of inappropriate or unwelcome behavior and enable policy or procedural modifications without formal investigation. That concludes the SSC statement. I'd be happy to take questions.
All right, thank you, Dr. Holland. Are there any questions on the SSC report? Kelly?
Thank you, Chair Guralnick. Dr. Holland, regarding the SSC recommendation for training, did the SSC discuss the training previously provided to SSC members, which was entitled Harassment and Discrimination Training? And if so, did the SSC think that training was valuable?
Thank you for the question through the chair, Ms. Kelly. We did not discuss that. And I'm not sure if I'm aware of when that training occurred.
Thank you, Dr. Holland. It was offered to SSC members at the end of 2022 and the beginning of 2023. I would appreciate some feedback on that training as we move forward on this initiative.
Okay, all right. I will we'll check back in with the rest of SSC about that, but that was not discussed at our meeting.
All right, any further questions on the SSC report? Thank you, Dr. Holland.
Thank you.
We'll next go to the Salmon Technical Team. Dr. Safiq, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. I will be reading Agenda Item C7A, Supplemental STT Report 1. The Salmon Technical Team reviewed and discussed the Attachment 6 under this agenda item titled Recommendations for a Respectful and Harassment-Free Workplace. The STT also had the opportunity to review the draft Scientific and Statistical Committee report on the same topic. The STT supports efforts to develop policies intended to ensure a respectful, harassment-free workplace when engaging in council activities. The STT supports the recommendations provided in the SSC report to help improve council policy, which are outlined here for reference. 1. Consult experts in workplace law, human resources, and sociology, for example, and review the literature on best practices in prevention of and response to harassment. 2. Provide effective training to ensure that council participants are aware of and comprehend the council policies, and provide training for the council participants assigned to receive and investigate reports of inappropriate behavior. The STT also notes that the training should be provided from experts outside of the council arena. 3. Better define the specifics of the reporting process and outcomes of investigations in the harassment procedures policy. 4. Develop a common set of ground rules for conduct to apply to each advisory body or meeting. 5. Develop a process for anonymous reporting. In addition, the STT acknowledges that harassment prevention and response is a multifaceted topic with far-reaching application. Where it is appropriate, we encourage the council to consider these factors in related fields of council policy, such as, but not limited to, diversity, equity, inclusion, and retention. Thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Safiq. Are there any questions on the STT report? Kelly Ames.
Thank you, Chair Guralnick. Dr. Safiq, similar question that I asked the SSC. I'm just curious if the STT discussed the training previously provided and if you had any feedback. If you don't, I just would appreciate that feedback in the future. Thank you.
Hello, thank you for your question. The STT did not discuss this item, but I will certainly go back to our panel and bring that up as a point of discussion, and we will get back to you with what we've discussed.
Corey Ridings.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Dr. Safiq. I have a question about the last part of the statement here. Where it is appropriate, we encourage the council to consider these factors in related fields of council policy, such as, but not limited to, diversity, equity, inclusion, and retention. I'm wondering if you could share a little bit more with us about the conversation you had about the connection between diversity, equity, inclusion, and retention and what we're talking about today.
Certainly, Ms. Ridings, thank you for the question. The conversation circled around oftentimes many institutions will call for the inclusion of diverse demographics of people, usually folks who have been or are identified as members of historically marginalized communities, which is wonderful. Historically speaking, sometimes those calls have not included a pre-existing framework to protect those individuals once they enter the institutional operating procedures or bodies. And sometimes what can happen is when these individuals start to meet their expectations or start to identify areas in those institutions or processes where there might be challenges or opportunities for growth, sometimes those individuals have been met with retaliation and haven't had the support provided to them to be able to navigate challenging institutions around frameworks or policies that may exclude those groups. And so when we think about harassment prevention and thinking about how we can respond to cases of harassment, It's protecting those individuals, and it's also reinsuring or reinforcing the culture that we want to retain those individuals when they do the hard work of identifying where our systems need growth or change.
All right, thank you. Any further questions? Thank you, Dr. Safiq. We'll now go to the Habitat Committee, and I think Carrie Griffin will be reading that report. Carrie?
Yes, good morning, Mr. Chair and council members. We didn't have anyone available to read the HC report, so I will read it into the record. This is the Habitat Committee report on C7. The Habitat Committee heard an update on the Pacific Fishery Management Council's respectful workplace procedures from Carrie Griffin. The HC suggests more clarity on two issues. One, while there is a clear statement that harassment and retaliation will not be tolerated, it is less clear what accountability measures will be. A clear statement on the consequences of violations may be warranted. And two, it's unclear what types of harassment allegations can remain anonymous. The statement suggests that anonymity cannot be guaranteed for matters of sexual harassment and safety. Does this mean that anonymity cannot be guaranteed for other types of allegations, for example, racial harassment? And that concludes the Habitat Committee statement.
All right, thank you very much, Carrie. Let's see if there are any questions, although we don't have any committee members here to answer. So thanks very much, Carrie.
Thank you.
And now we'll have the SAS report. I'll ask Staff Officer Robin Elke to provide that.
Good morning, council members. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. This is the Salmon Advisory Subpanel report on membership appointments and council operating procedures. The SAS reviewed the document recommendations for a respectful and harassment-free workplace, which was attachment 6, and specific to the ground rules portion of the report, the SAS supports an overarching set of ground rules that apply to all advisory bodies, but acknowledges that each committee is different and there may be additional ground rules needed that would be specific to that committee. In reviewing the ground rules provided in attachment 6, the SAS agrees with all items outlined, with the exception of item F, which could be shortened at the end of the word time, as noted here through strike through. And so item F reads, allow for a balance of speaking time, moderate the length and number of each time each individual speaks on each topic. The SAS was suggesting that item F just simply read, allow for a balance of speaking time. They didn't want to stifle any conversations and thought that the chair itself could balance the length of time as needed if they thought an individual was dominating the conversation or such like that. So they thought they would be able to moderate that themselves. The SAS supports establishing ground rules for all advisory bodies, either with a universal set of rules that may be supplemented by individual committees to suit their specific needs, or to allow the advisory body to draft their own set of ground rules based on council guidance. And that concludes the SAS statement.
Thank you very much, Robin. Any questions that folks want to aim at Robin? All right, thanks very much, Robin.
Thank you.
That completes all of our reports. I believe there's one individual for public comment, and that's Ms. Tara Brock, who we've not seen here in person for some time. So it's great to see you here and welcome.
Thank you, Chair Grolnick, members of the council. It's great to see all of you in person. This is my first meeting back, so it's nice to be back and see all your faces. But honestly, it is a lot harder to sit up here and look at all of you than be in my computer screen, especially when talking about these issues. As you heard from Ms. Ames, this process can be very intimidating. Anyone who sat in this hot seat knows that to be true. sitting and talking to 20 people at once or testifying here, it's intimidating. I mean, my heart races almost every time I get up here. And when I spoke to you last time about this issue in March, I think many of you were surprised to hear about my experience at council meetings and the experience of many of my colleagues. And I think that's because many of you support a inclusive process, a process where people feel welcome. And I have not had that experience. And many of my colleagues have not either. That's why it's so important that the expectation of council participants be made very clear. And the consequences for not abiding those expectations are also made clear. We really do support all of the work happening here. I think this is an important discussion, and I'm so grateful that it's finally coming to the council floor. And I guess I'll now actually turn to all the reports that we have in front of you and the specific proposals. I do support the idea of ground rules for advisory body meetings. I wanted to note Mr. Anderson's comment on removing the word repeatedly from the COP, that sometimes one action or incident might justify removal from an AB or other consequences. I think it's important to consider that. But I also think it's very important that we develop a broader code of conduct that does apply to all council-related activities. So very much support those recommendations from the SSC. And also think that their idea of bringing in experts is a good one. There's a lot of expertise on this. There has been a lot of work around the country and within organizations and within NOAA on these issues. And the council has access to a lot of those resources and should be bringing those to bear here at council meetings to make sure that we are using best practices and that those are being implemented here at council. I also think it's very important that we better define the reporting processes and outcomes. So those are very clearly laid out, that people know the consequences for not abiding by those actions. And also ensuring that there is a process for anonymous reporting. I understand that as was pointed out, there kind of can be two roads when there's an anonymous report, but that's an important thing, that people feel they can come, and that when repeated anonymous reports come in, those can be addressed and investigated. As members of Oregon state commissions and boards, we're required to take annual trainings on discrimination and harassment. So I very much support the council looking into that here too for all council participants. They are really important annual reminders of how our behavior can affect others. And it's yearly. So it's a good reminder every year on implicit bias, on harassment, and on reporting mechanisms for people who sit on Oregon state boards and commissions. And I think the council could do with a training like that. There are a couple hours every year, and I find them to be very useful. And of course, I lost my screen here. So I think with that, I just want to say that the council has repeatedly stated goals of being inclusive and increasing the diversity of the council family, but ensuring that council participants feel safe and welcome is going to be necessary to achieve that goal, as you heard from the last few statements. I want to thank the council again, staff, all the advisory bodies for their thoughtful attention to this issue. I'd be happy to take any questions to answer them to the best of my ability. So thank you again for taking this up. It's a hard topic and has brought up a lot of things for me personally. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Tara. Any questions of Tara? Krista Svensson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your testimony this morning. I'll admit my heart races every time I have to talk, and I'm on the other side of the table. So thank you and everyone for the testimony. It is a difficult thing. I'm appreciative of the acknowledgement that we are trying, everyone here. And I am curious, based upon what has been presented, if you think anything needs to be strengthened, but also if from your perspective, you see anything that we've put in what we're considering that would potentially make things either less collegial or feel like less of a family. Occasionally there's the unintended consequence of people overreact the other direction and think, oh no, I can't talk to somebody because what if? And I just would really appreciate your insight into both of those pieces.
Thank you through the chair, Ms. Svensson. I think everything that is being discussed here today is a positive step and certainly is strengthening the guidelines for how we behave at council. And I hear you on the, then people might feel not open to be able to speak their minds, but the discourse and disagreement is part of this process, and it just needs to be done in a respectful manner. And I don't view that anything that's being discussed here today would limit that. And we all have disagreements probably within our own families, and so I don't view that as being something that would change that process here. It's just being respectful and making sure that we are behaving in a way that is inclusive and welcoming. But that doesn't mean we can't disagree or not speak our mind. And hopefully people will still feel free to do that, but in a respectful way.
All right, thank you very much, Tara.
Thank you.
Well, that concludes public comment. And if we can get our council tasks up on the screen under this agenda item, that would be terrific. So we will take these in the order suggested by staff. And so the first action we have is to appoint a member, to the commercial troll position on the HMSAS. Vice Chair Pettinger.
Thank you, Chair Grolnick. She's Senator to pull it up, but I move the council appoint Mr. Clayton Wraith to the commercial troll position on the Highly Migratory Species Advisory Subpanel.
All right. We don't have it up on the screen, but I think it's a pretty short motion. Let's see if there is a second. Seconded by Krista Svensson. Please speak to your motion.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Wraith was recently named Executive Director of the WFOA, replacing the previous longtime Executive Director, Wayne Heikla, who was a longtime member of the HMSAS. Clayton has extensive experience in the HMS fishery, having worked on his family's vessel during his childhood years and through college. His educational background will also add real value to his representation of the commercial troll fishery on the advisory panel, and I believe that it will be an exceptional addition to that body. So, thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Are there any questions for the maker of the motion or discussion on the motion? Krista Svensson?
Not a question, but I do want to say I am supportive. I'm appreciative of Brad making the motion. Really a difficult decision. Both gentlemen have a lot to add. I don't think we could have made a wrong decision with either. And I've had the privilege of working with both of them on management type issues and really hope that we can keep both of them engaged in the council process, because I think long-term it would serve us well.
All right, thank you. I'm not seeing any other hands, so I will call the question. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Abstentions? And the motion passes unanimously. Thank you for the motion. Congratulations, Mr. Wraith. Next, we have a vacancy on the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, the ODF&W position on the ground fish management team. Lynn Mettis.
I move the council appoint Mr. Christian Heath to the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife position on the ground fish management team.
Language is accurate and complete. Look for a second. Seconded by Brad Pettinger. Please speak to your motion.
Mr. Heath has worked in the groundfish halibut project for about 7 years. He has been helping behind the scenes on GMT analysis, both on commercial and recreational issues. He is completed a several-month job rotation in the project leader position, which he has been in now since June 1st. And last year, he had the opportunity to be in a job rotation where he served on the HMSMT and the ecosystem work group. So this has provided him a pretty good view of what the council does. And I think he will fit in personality-wise and skill-wise. He will be a great asset to the GMT.
All right, thank you very much. Are there any questions for the maker of the motion or discussion on this motion? Call the question. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, no. Abstentions? The motion passes unanimously. Thank you for the motion and congratulations to Mr. Heath. Returning to our list of items, next we have some vacancies. We have 2 vacancies. We have the CPSAS commercial and the EAS Washington at-large positions for which we don't have nominees. So I think staff has suggested that we advertise these and take up any applications at the September council meeting. So everyone's okay with that? Mr. Dooley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. I also noticed we had some resignations from the Groundfish Advisory subpanel and wonder if that should be included in the same breath.
Yeah, if I could ask Ms. Ames to review all of our vacancies, including our recent vacancies, and just so everyone's on the same page. And we all know when we go back to our respective home locations, we know which bushes we need to beat to get nominees.
Thank you, Chair Grolnick. Yes, just to recap, we have the positions here that are listed on the screen. The CPSAS commercial, 1 position, the ecosystem advisory subpanel, Washington at large, 1 position. I called those out specifically because we had advertised them for about 5 months and not received any applications. So I was looking for some council guidance if you had any recommendations on how to proceed, whether it was just simply to re-advertise them and remind the remaining folks on those committees to reach out and see if they could drum up some support. The additional 2 vacancies I mentioned were 2 on the Groundfish Advisory subpanel. It was the Oregon Charter Boat position and the Trawl at-large position. Both of those are currently being advertised, so no additional action is needed here. You'll consider any nominations at your September meeting.
All right, well, does anyone have any brilliant ideas on the 2 that are listed here? Other than re-advertising? Heather Hall.
Thank you. This is not a brilliant idea, just an offer and appreciation for you putting the nomination back out again for the Washington at-large on the EAS, and just confirmation that we'll do some legwork on that and see what we can do leading up to the September council meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. Lynn Mattis.
Somewhat similarly, we were made aware shortly after the last council meeting of the GAP Charter Oregon representative resigning, and we are trying to reach out with our contacts within the state of Oregon to try to fill that vacancy.
Thank you. Bob Dooley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just in that vein, Marine Resource Education Program, MREP, typically reaches out to alumni and makes them aware of these vacancies so that it's brought to their attention. So I just wanted to add that to it. Thanks.
Yeah, I guess I would encourage anyone to use whatever resources they have because the more applicants we have, the choosier we can be. And at this point, we have no choices to make. So, all right, anything further on number 3 here? All right, I'm getting the thumbs up from Kelly, so I guess we did a good job. Let's move on to number 4. This has to do with the Marine Planning Committee. We had a pretty thorough discussion under that agenda item, and we decided to continue the committee for another 2-year term. And I don't recall that we elected to make any changes in membership structure or function. And I want to look around the table and make sure that that is consistent with everyone's understanding. I don't think we need a motion here. So just want to make sure we knock that off and we're clear. So let's move on to number 5. Pardon me, I'm sorry, Lynn Mattis.
Thank you. Sorry, I did get my hand up quick enough. In our delegation meeting this morning, we did have some discussion about this remaining an ad hoc body or becoming a long-term standing body. I don't think we have to make that decision at this point, but there was some interest from the Oregon delegation that this is likely going to be a long-term issue. And after this next 2-year cycle, we may want to reconsider how we operate this body. Not anything for today, but just as our long-term thinking and planning.
Thank you. And I think it's worth reiterating here that when we established the committee, the goal was that it was going to be a committee of the various advisory bodies. So it would function to collect together those inputs. And, I guess we want to continue to encourage advisory bodies to work through the MPC so that we don't end up with, a number of repetitive reports or a number of reports where the input could have been provided to the MPC. I realize timing is an issue, but we have to do the best we can. Now let's turn to our 2 new ad hoc work groups, the Klamath River and Sacramento River work groups that we established yesterday. There is a position on each work group for the council. And it's not described in the white paper who that person might be, what qualifications. So we need some guidance there, or I need guidance as council chair to figure out who's the right person for that position. So I'd like to get some input from the council. Susan Bishop.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a note, I went back and did some digging before, sort of where the language came from, what we had done in previous work groups. And what I found was that the language that was in the draft TORs yesterday is identical to the language that's been in most of the previous TORs that we've had on salmon-related work groups going back until about 2012. So looking at the roster of those work groups, the council representation sort of varied depending on what the issue was that was discussed. But in general, there wasn't a council member per se that was appointed. In most cases, it was the STT chair that served. Not all cases, but most cases. And I think that the point there was to have someone in a position on those work groups that all dealt with very important salmon items, that understood both the technical aspects of it, but also knew enough about the council process and what the council discussion had been around the formation of that work group to help guide the discussion within those work groups. So I don't know if that provides some additional information or not in terms of appointments, but that's sort of been the history as we've worked through these work groups themselves, and recognizing, I think Mr. Anderson made the point yesterday, this is a technical work group, as have been the ones in the past.
Thank you for that background. Bill Anderson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I agree with Ms. Bishop's perspective on this, and would encourage you to consider the STT chair to be the council representative on the work groups.
All right. Is there any disagreement with that? I think that's a good course here. We're all smart people around the table, but we're not technical salmon people. So I also would note that much of the composition of that HOTA committee seems to be directed towards current membership on the STT. So John Ugoretz.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And I am channeling my inner Yaremko here, so please bear with me. But my understanding is that Mr. Farrell is a National Marine Fisheries Service employee and should be representing National Marine Fisheries Service, not the council. So I'm not sure that that's appropriate.
Well, I do know there's membership on the ad hoc work group by a member of the Southwest Fisheries Science Center, which is where Michael is, but that position could be taken by someone else in the Southwest Center. And Mike could still be chair, unless there's no one else interested at the Southwest Fisheries Science Center. I would suggest that we, I understand where your REMCO is coming from, but if indeed this language is identical to what we've had in the past, then I'm not going to go back and look. And if in the past that has been the STT chair, then there seems to be a history of how those words are interpreted. So what I would suggest is, well, let me see if there's any other further comments, and then I'm going to offer my suggestion. Merrick Burden.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Maybe just a point of clarification for Mr. Anderson, who recommended that the STT chair be appointed. Was it your intention that Michael Farrell would be on both of those working groups, or one or the other?
I had not thought of that. I suspect that asking him to do both is maybe beyond his capacity with all the other things that he has on his work on his plate. But I would yeah, so I don't, if those two could be shared by someone else on the STT, so that we're not asking Dr. O'Farrell to do both. That seems to me to be something that the chair could explore in looking at the other people that are on the STT. And I understand that, you know, I don't have the composition of both of those committees in front of me, but in thinking about what they were looking at, reflecting back on what I think they were, that almost everyone on there is working for an agency or entity. And so I guess I don't view having the person that's representing the council being an employee of one of the management entities or science centers as a problem.
Well, I think it's, I'm reluctant to appoint anyone without having spoken to them first. And we haven't yet heard who these agencies intend to appoint, and hopefully that will be done in the near term. And so maybe we see how those appointments shake out, and then see, because there's a pretty broad spectrum of technical capability on that list, aside from the anonymous council member or council representative. So, you know, maybe we see where these agencies go, and then we fill in that spot. Does that make sense? I see one nodding head. Okay. All right, so that's what we'll do. And then because this work group, we can't wait till September for these work groups to get started. I guess we'll just have to be in touch as a group. Just if I get a nominee for that position, I will certainly run it by the council for any reaction, or to make sure that, you know, there's been a consultation, unless it happens after August 10th, in which case that'll be Brad's job. All right, is there anything further on number 4? No, it's 5. Pardon? That was 5. Oh, that was 5? Well, indeed, nothing further on 4 or on 5. So now we're on to number 6. I'm going to temporarily hand the gavel to Vice Chair Brad Pettinger.
All right.
So we have the task of appointing the chair and vice chair. So if you'll call on me.
Chair Grelly.
All right. I move that Brad Pettinger serve as council chair and Mr. Pete Hassemer serve as council vice chair for the August 11, 2023 to August 10, 2024 term.
Is the language of the screen accurate?
It seems to be, yes.
Okay. Please, for a second. Second by Bob Dooley. Thank you, Bob. Please speak to your motion.
Well, it's been an honor serving as chair of this council. It truly has. But it's time for Brad Pettinger to move up to the chair position, where I know he'll do a great job. And Pete Hassemer, who's already done an excellent job as vice chair, will continue as vice chair. And I'll move back to where I used to sit and try not to make too much trouble for our new leadership.
Questions for the motion maker? Or just Bill Anderson?
I think on behalf of all of us around the table, we want to extend our appreciation to Mark Grelnick for his serving as chair of this body for the last 3 years. You've done an outstanding job in representing us both in managing our meetings, both here as well as outside outside the council table, such as the CCC. You've made us all proud, and want to thank you for all the time that you put in as chair and vice chair of the council.
Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Anyone else? Bob?
I just want to reiterate what Phil said and agree with it totally. I also want to acknowledge you led us through some pretty dark times with COVID and all that in the virtual meetings, and done a fantastic job, and I really appreciate it in other venues as well. So thank you.
Butch?
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Yeah, as hard as this is for me to say. Mark, you've done a most excellent job, and I just want to reiterate what everybody said. And we knew we had a shining star when you were in the SAS, and you've done that committee proud, and I just want to congratulate you on a little successful chairmanship. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair.
Thank you, Butch. Anyone else? Okay. Well, I'll call for the question. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, no. Abstentions? Motion passes unanimously. So I guess before I hand the gavel back, I would say that it has been an honor to be his vice chair. He's been a fantastic mentor and really done a great, really, we all know he's a great example of how to be a chairman. And I hope I pick up some of that, and through at least osmosis and nothing else. But he's he's been a great friend to me and to the entire council family. And I've just been proud to serve as his vice chair. It's just anyway. Yep, thank you. Oh, Pete.
Thank you, Vice Chair Pettinger, and similar. What an incredible honor it was, and opportunity to sit next to this gentleman and learn his leadership and from his leadership skills and that, and move forward. So really appreciate the honor to do that. And again, I'm humbled by the confidence, the respect the council has in electing me as the vice chair for the next term. And I think I'll say again what I believe I said when I was first elected. My task for myself is to do better than my best and help this council. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Pete. Okay. Well, I'm going to hand the gavel back to our chair. What? Oh. What's that?
All right. Well, thanks very much. I've got just a few more items here. We'll move on to considering the proposed changes to the council operating procedures, which as Deputy Director Ames described as housekeeping changes. So let me see, Pete Hassemer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't want to cut any discussion short, so if I'll allow you the opportunity to look if others want to weigh in, but everything we do is important. Some things are a little easier than others, and whenever you're ready, I do have a motion on this item.
All right, great. Let me just see if there are any discussion before we have a motion. I don't see any hands, so please move forward.
Thank you, Sandra. I move the council adopt changes to council operating procedures 1 through 4 and 6 as proposed in agenda item C7, attachment 5, June 2023.
All right, the language on the screen is accurate and complete?
Yes, it is.
Look for a second. Seconded by Lynn Mattis.
Thank you. As I said, as Ms. Ames indicated when she went through this, these are a series of changes just to reflect our current practices in the hybrid meeting environment. I read through those and some of them caused me to think a little bit. I won't go into that now, but yes, they are all appropriate, and there are other changes down the road we can make to those. We bring those up on a routine basis, but for now, this is great to cover those routine practices there in the hybrid meeting format. Thank you.
All right, thank you for the motion. Are there any questions for the maker of the motion or discussion on the motion? Lynn Mattis.
Yeah, I agree with what Mr. Hassemer said. I actually had the exact same motion ready to go if nobody else did. I guess I should have communicated better there. I think this also helps us take advantage of the technology and some of the things we learned during COVID. And additionally, as an agency staff member, we are being asked to do more and more with less. And that may mean we have some limitations on travel because of other commitments. So this reflects us being able to have people participate remotely if they, for one reason or another, can't attend. So I know as an agency person, it helps us in our planning and who we have in the seat. So I think it's good to reflect our current practices and what we learned during COVID. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. Any further discussion on the motion? All right, I'll call the question. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, no. Abstentions? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much for the motion. So that takes us to our last point on this agenda item, and this is number 8, which is to consider additional measures to promote a respectful and harassment-free work environment and to provide guidance. We have material in the briefing book, and we received a number of comments from the advisory bodies as well as a public comment. Brad Pettinger.
Yeah, interesting. The reports we got today that it seems to me that the management teams did not receive the council training the APs did. And I'm assuming that's because they work for state agencies who probably have given that already. So it seems to me that we've kind of gone into this with, I guess, with those bodies not understanding what the APs, the training they received. And so I'd like to confirm that that's the case and what we might do in the future. So.
Merrick Burden.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the question, Mr. Pettinger. You'll recall last year, and actually going all the way back to the start of my tenure, we began developing harassment policies through the CCC. As part of those policies, NOAA then offered some training to the councils around the matter of harassment, and there were limited spots available for that training. So due to that limited number of spots, we did have to decide who should receive the training and who should not. And your insight is correct. What we decided to do was to assume that NIMS representatives have had access to that training, which they did, and that B, state agency staff also had access to training, and we received confirmation that they had. And so by and large, in our council, the training was distributed to folks that are not employees of federal or state agencies. Each council approached this a bit differently. Our council had the largest number of folks that took a training of any other council. And that was, I guess, my philosophy that we should try to saturate our council process with this training. Other councils took a different approach, and they were very deliberate in who should take the training versus who should not. So if you have further thoughts about this training and how we distribute it in the future, I think that would be good to hear. We are in discussions with NOAA ongoing about future training possibilities, and it does look like that is a possibility that we will have training afforded to us. Thus far, the philosophy that I've taken in distributing the training is to try to get it out to as many people as possible. And if there are thoughts about any more specificity, I'd welcome them. Hopefully that answers your question.
Vice Chair Hassemer. Thank you, Chair Gurelnik. Yes, as I went through the materials too, some of the reports caused me to reflect on this for a while. And since our action is to consider additional measures, I think as we talk about moving forward on this, a little context and maybe history is appropriate here. I guess I was first introduced to this, as Executive Burden said. He's been working on this since he came here, but when I was elected vice chair last year, because that role initiated August 10th in the CCC, the Council Coordinating Committee was bringing up this policy and working on it. So I had the opportunity to sit in on one of the national CCC calls and discuss this. And so in terms of development of these policies, what I learned is it did originate at a high level because we were working with NOAA, the NIMS headquarters staff, their legal counsel, general counsel, and those working in the arenas that were important to this. So there was, high level input, a lot of consideration to put into this across all of the councils. And it developed into these items that were brought to us. And excuse me while I find my presentation here, that in Ms. Ames' overview gave us the history that the coordinating committee discussions and what was passed to the committees and our adoption of that. So the other piece of it, and I really respect the consideration of the advisory bodies in those reports on how to move forward. But as part of that history, and maybe this is part of coming out of the CCC, is our communications committee talked about some efforts to expand the visibility of what the councils do in the coordinating committee. And so there is this website out there, fisherycouncils.org, and all the CCC materials are on there. And at the last meeting we had in May, when the CCCs got together, one of the presentations by Ms. Stephanie Hunt was on the harassment training that Executive Burden was just talking about. And so if anybody's interested, they can go to that website and the presentation at least is posted there, just like all of our presentations on what came about. And I do want to highlight a couple of things again is where we've been so we can think about where we need to go as the next step. And so on the larger across all the councils, training was assigned to 466 individuals. And at the time of our CCC meeting, 80% of the people assigned had completed that training. So that's a fairly good success rate. If I read this right, in this council, there were 110 individuals that were invited to take that. 74 of them completed the training. NOAA had provided some money. And so the CCC had a discussion. The whole discussion was focused about what do we do next? What are some of the challenges associated with that? An interesting finding, I thought, was that no one who took the training took advantage of optional training. And the example they gave was managing bias. And so, you know, it was pretty obvious that I took the training, and if nobody took additional training, I didn't do it either. But when I went through that, I've been through a lot of these trainings, and I thought this was very valuable and helpful. And I learned some things, and maybe it's the admission about not knowing unconscious or implicit bias is that thing really piqued my interest there, and how that operates in these environments. And that's something that we should look into. As part of the CCC discussions then about moving forward, there was a discussion about potential training in the future. What should we do beyond what was done? And some of the ideas that were presented there and discussed: preventing harassment and discrimination, recognizing and managing bias, diversity, inclusion, belonging, bystander intervention. So a lot of these things that have been mentioned in those reports, maybe it's just important to point out that at the national level, at the CCC level, this is being discussed. How do we move forward? Which things are important to people? And what frequency should this be done on? And I really appreciate also the comments of Ms. Tara Brock, who came up here. And I'm going to go back and listen to the words she gave to us, because it's very important to get that type of input to try and shape this training as we move forward. So maybe just the important points are that this isn't the end. This is the beginning, and the councils are working together collectively to look at a path forward with NIMS leadership, and there's opportunities for input through this council on how this council addresses it and which things are important for this council to take to the larger body, the council coordinating committee, and think about how all of this is put together so it's meaningful for us. I think these things are getting a lot of attention, that this is lesser important, but recently in Idaho, I know there's a lot of people who have been in the fisheries career. The international organization, the American Fisheries Society, the Western Division meeting was held in Boise. There was a follow-up survey, and part of it, they did talk about the environmental justice, the harassment and those things, but they sent out a questionnaire. What types of future training would people look for? And one of the things was this unconscious bias or implicit bias training. I checked that box. That, you know, there are areas to look into. So it goes beyond this, but as just a closing, then I support what is in the staff's paper there. I think we're mapping out a good future. It doesn't end today, but we have to think about that and incorporate that into some of our future procedures. So I just want to give a little bit about the history to indicate that this is a very active topic, and we will continue to discuss that. Thank you.
Bill Anderson and then Bob Dooley.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the work that has been done up to this point in time, in terms of modifying and suggesting additional language in our policy on this topic. For me, we need to do some additional work. I think the 5 points that were made in the SSC's report, that we need to address each one of those 5 points, not necessarily today, but as a follow-up, and I wouldn't put it off very long. I think we need to address those. They were supported by the STT. I think most of them were supported by Tara in her remarks. The consultation of other experts and the review of literature on best practices is an important one. And how might we do that? I think the point on effective training is essential to harassment prevention is spot on. On the training piece, I think we need to have our own training program. We had at the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, we have online training. It is mandatory for employees to take. I think it should be mandatory for everyone that's appointed to the council as part of the council or committees, subpanels, anyone that's officially appointed to a position within our council structure. It's mandatory for them to take it. The 74 or whatever it was out of 110, that doesn't cut it for me. Everybody's got to take it, and if you don't take it, then you lose your position. I just feel strongly about that. I also think it's on the training part that you need to take it periodically. I've taken, I don't know how many, but a number of them. And every time I take it, it reminds me and causes me to think about how I'm interacting with my fellow colleagues. And if you take it once and you call it done, I think over time, you begin to forget about some of those key points that the training causes you to think about. So I think periodic training, a requirement, is something that it would be important. There's the other points that they made about the specifics of the reporting process and outcomes of investigation should be better defined and documented. They make that point. We ought to be thinking about how to respond to that. I do think that the common set of ground rules, rather than separate ground rules, is a wise recommendation. I heard support for that. That doesn't mean that individual advisory bodies couldn't add to it if they wanted, but I think there does need to be a standard that they all have. And the process for anonymously reporting is also an important one to do. So I think we need to have someone within the council staff. I think the deputy director is a reasonable person to do that, but it's obviously up to the executive director to have. We don't have a human resources program. Maybe they do within the council staff structure, but that's in terms of that applies to the broader council family. So we need to have someone that is that point person, I think, that tracks what we're doing and how we're doing on the various actions and protocols and policies that we have in place to prevent harassment of all kinds. Again, I think we have some additional work to do. And as I mentioned in my question of Ms. Ames, I don't think in all cases you have to repeat the behavior before there's a consequence or potential removal. And I would like to have that word removed as part of our action. Thanks for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you, Phil. Bob Dooley, then Heather Hall, and then at some point we can take a break, but people have a lot of things on their mind right now. Let's get them out. Go ahead, Bob.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I totally agree with Pete and Phil's comments. I think that they're spot on. I just want to make another comment on the training we have been offered. In November, I believe it was, we were told by Merrick that there would be training available, offered, and to, if people wanted to take it. And I was really quite happy after, gosh, it was right after that meeting, that it wasn't got an email that it was assigned, and to be done by, I think, February 23rd, I think was the date, which I took that as a mandate. I didn't take that as an option. It was an assignment. And so I took it seriously, got it done, and took great value from it. I think it's a great thing. My question is, why is that limited? It's an electronic deal. It's online. Why does it have to be just a certain number from the council? And I agree with Phil. It should be everybody, and it should be required. And I will just make one other reference here. We do safety training and for vessels, and it's Coast Guard training, and you're expected to do drills once a month. If it was set it and forget it, we'd do it once and forget about it. But there's prescribed training, and it's important to keep doing it and refreshing, because you learn every time, and you maybe do a self-assessment of is this working, and are you complying? Are you considering these things? So I agree with Phil totally, and I would like to understand why we don't have this as mandatory to everyone, including state officials, including federal, anybody who's in this council process. I don't think it's too much to ask to fill out that survey. Maybe takes an hour at the most. It's not a big burden. So I think it's well worth doing, and I think you can't do it enough. So thank you.
Let me just quickly answer the question, or I'll let Merrick answer your question about why it was limited.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And you would humor me. I also have maybe a follow-up question for you all related to this training, if that's okay. I guess first, to your question, Mr. Dooley, the training that we received was licensed by a private corporation. And so they have different fees they charge for different number of trainings. And so because it was bundled with NOAA largely, and then with the councils, we only had so many spots to go around. And NOAA offered that to us for free. So we weren't in a position of adding to it. In hindsight, maybe we should have asked for more or offered some funding. But this was our first time at that. This discussion right now is very timely because we are actually just received a calendar invite from headquarters where the executive directors and headquarters were going to meet to discuss the future of this training possibility. And so I think this also relates to some of the comments that Mr. Anderson had made. The path that we are going on now is to have a training for the councils. It would be the same training for each council. Some of the things that are on my mind is that the training that we took last fall and early this winter weren't really tuned to the council process. They were more organized in a corporate structure where you had clear lines of reporting. And so while I think it was valuable, there's some fine tuning I think we should do to make it appropriate to the council's process. So there was a comment, Mr. Anderson, that you had made saying we need our own training. And I don't believe that having all of the councils together with a common training is different from that vision. But if you think that we need something unique to the Pacific Council, I guess that would be an important point of clarity. The route that we're going down now is to pool our resources as councils and secure a training into the future. And we're debating how frequently we should do that.
All right. I'm going to go to Heather and then Joe, and then we're going to take a break. And okay, Heather and then Joe Oatman, and then there are other hands up. Please save that for after our break.
Well, thank you, Chair Grelnick. I just wanted to first offer appreciation for Pete's introduction and Phil's comments and those that have come before this on this topic. And I also just wanted to thank the management teams and advisory subpanels for their really excellent input on this topic. I think it's really helpful and appreciate that they are engaged and providing their input to us. I also wanted to just call out the STT's statement, and I read it after reading the SSC's statement and just appreciated the alignment that was there, and just wanted to flag also the concluding sentences in the STT statement where they are linking this harassment issue back to the diversity, equity, inclusion issues and how we hire and that linkage. And I just thought it was really important and wanted to give it extra attention here as we start forming our recommendations to the council. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. Joe Oatman.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I appreciate the opportunity to provide some comments on this item. So as was noted previously, the tribes previously commented on the need for more specificity regarding defining harassment, as well as reporting and response procedures. At the March 2023 meeting, we provided some suggestions on how to improve the model policy on addressing harassment of council employees and council process participants, and how it could be incorporated into our council operating procedures. These tribal suggestions were acknowledged and summarized in the supplemental staff presentation that we received earlier by Ms. Ames. While more work in detail has been provided, as reflected in our materials under this agenda item, the tribes remain concerned that these are still vague in the March 2023 harassment procedures policy, as well as the recommendation outlined in attachment 6 under this agenda item. We appreciate that advisory bodies were included in the conversation as we recommended. However, we note that the expertise and best practices for preventing and responding to harassment are not the areas of expertise that advisory bodies possess. So it is not enough to develop meeting protocols around respect. The council must anticipate and provide safeguards against the type of harassment that may happen outside of open convened meetings. The tribes recommend a process that utilizes outside expertise to inform policies so that they include accepted best practices, training for those that will be tasked with responding to and following up on reports of harassment or inappropriate behavior, and diversity in those tasked with dealing with reports. We support the recommendations from the SSC on this point. Without training from experts, it is likely that any council protocols or response mechanisms regarding serious allegations could result in unintended consequences, including re-traumatizing victims, enabling perpetrators, and increased legal liability for those agencies and individuals involved. Tribes would like to remain engaged in ongoing efforts to ensure that council meetings and related functions are respectful and properly responsive to harassment. I do note, as Dr. Bergen just mentioned, on the training that those who were able to participate in that late last year into early this year, that it was designed more for a corporate setting. And, one, who took that, they have to try and translate, those sorts of examples and scenarios to a council setting and in council activities. And so creating our own training program on this that's specifically designed for the council process and participants would be important. So I do appreciate this opportunity to share these comments on behalf of the tribes and those tribal representatives and individuals who participate in this council forum and process. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. So we'll take a break now. Is 15 minutes okay? Does anyone need more than that? Okay, we'll take a 15-minute break. We'll be back here at 9:55. And we will, just as we step away, keep in mind our charge here is to provide guidance. It's not to articulate new standards, just basically I think in line with I think the discussion we've already had. So we'll see you back here at 9:55.
Recording stopped. Recording in progress.
All right, it's 9:55. So if we're still missing a couple folks, but they'll trickle in here and we'll get started. Okay, we're on council discussion, item number 8. Keep in mind our task here is guidance, and we've received some good comments already. So, but I don't want to cut off any discussion. I think there were some hands raised. I'm going to go to Krista and then John Ugoretz and then Susan Bishop.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I am appreciative for the thoughts that have been around the table. I do want to just briefly on some discussion we had this morning in the Oregon delegation on this topic, and that management teams and advisors have been very cognizant of not duplicating reports. There were a number of people, I'm not going to say the entire team because they did not have the discussion in their entire team, but we do have a number of members who are supportive, but recognize that, hey, we don't want 12 reports on the same topic. And I just don't want the lack of reports to be taken as unengagement or not interest. And I think it would be helpful moving forward on this topic or other sensitive topics if the council would prefer to have even a very short statement saying we're in support of, to let our advisory bodies know that so that they can comment appropriately.
Thank you for that, Krista. John Ugoretz.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And I want to follow on some of the discussion that I agree with wholeheartedly regarding training and mandatory training. Several people have mentioned. As a longtime civil servant who's worked for state, federal government, as well as private institutions, I have received and continue to receive training a lot on these items. I have benefited from that training. I think it is worthwhile. I do think people have pointed that out. And I do appreciate online platforms for their ease and ability to reach a lot of people. I think the councils writ large across the country should be working with NOAA to ensure consistent training across the board for all participants that are appointed to the councils, advisory bodies, et cetera. So totally supportive of that. At the same time, I will note that online training is only as effective as the person viewing it gives it. You can easily check the box without gaining much if you want, or if you're too busy, or if anything else is getting in the way. And I would suggest that perhaps across the councils, there might be some discussion about also considering some in-person training during council meetings for both the council itself and advisory bodies. And what I could envision is having some kind of contracted support come to each council and to each advisory body or groups of advisory bodies together during council meeting time, spend about an hour providing us with some specific training that is more designed for the council process, that gets to issues that are perhaps better relayed in person, that you get feedback immediately. I have found that type of training to be extremely useful. The other benefit of doing something like that is that the audience could view and receive the training as well. And that is the one place where we don't have much control over. We can't mandate training for audience participants in council meetings. And those individuals have a significant role in the way people are treated at the council. And while we can't mandate it, I think it would behoove us to have some way to have them witness that so that they know what we're receiving and they know what we're expecting of them. So just a thought moving forward. I know there would be a cost associated with that, and I think it's worth considering in the long run. All of that cost, I think, should be borne in a way that the councils are not put in jeopardy for all of the other things that we have to do with our budget. So it needs to be looked at from the agency perspective about how to fund the councils to do this. Thanks.
Thank you, John. Susan Bishop.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Everyone else has spoken very eloquently about the need for training, and I don't have anything to add there. I think it's extremely important. I think I agree with some of the comments that are made. I think it should be mandatory. It should be very clear about what the council is expecting. But I also agree with what John just mentioned, that it's really what you do with it afterwards. We can all take training and then we can fall back, right? Either because it's not something that we have learned yet, or because we just did what was required and we don't really believe in it. So many of the other things that are in the reports speak to that tone that the council sets, the expectations that the council sets, the ground rules, and also the way that the council members hold themselves as role models to the rest of the participants in the council. I want to acknowledge all of the work that the council staff did from the advisory body reports that we got and the additional comments that I received, as well as the engagement of the council. It underscores what an important topic this is. The council staff obviously has put in a lot of effort on this. I'd like to particularly give a shout out to Kelly on that. As most things that we do, there is a lot more of what was done than what might have been reflected. I noticed in the materials that were presented, the links to various other documents, agency documents, the information that the tribes presented, for example. That was a lot of work, and I want to acknowledge that. I also want to acknowledge that these are big steps. We talk a lot about where we need to go. We do need to go further. We do need more work to be done. But there has been a lot of work done in the last several years on this, and I just want to make sure we don't lose sight of that. I think the last thing that I want to acknowledge, and this has come up in testimony that I've listened to over at least since March, if not since last year on this, and that is that we are lucky enough to have a lot of new people coming in to the council. Many of them are young. Many of them are from other communities that aren't familiar with what we do. And as Tara mentioned, it can be a very intimidating place to come. Particularly if you are a young professional just starting out in your career and you are interacting with people that have been here for decades. I used to be one of those people. I can vaguely remember what that was like. And so you are hearing from some of the comments that you got, I think, with regard to the anonymous reporting in particular, somewhat of a lack of trust. And I guess I will just be blunt about that. We are making great strides. We are trying to remedy past wrongs, but people are concerned, about can I really report? Can I really trust that people are going to do the right thing? Many of us have reported in the past, not necessarily in this process, but others have been dismissed or have heard what our competence has been reported other places. And so I want to acknowledge that that is there, and it will be important for the council, I believe, going forward to try to address. It also reflects potentially a sort of lack of knowledge of what the process is and what the options are. And if someone encounters a situation where they are harassed, assaulted, abused, the types of things that these policies and procedures are designed to address, and they're young, and they're in a situation where there are a lot of people that may have influence on where their career goes, then they are going to be reaching out for options. What do I do? What are my options? What can I do? What are my choices? And try not to be sort of victimized again. So I support the anonymous reporting, but I would also consider, as we move forward and as we continue to work on this, consideration of a coordinator or somebody that someone who has experienced this can go as a first step and talk to you about what their options are. So they can be very deliberate about what their options are and what their choices that they want to make going forward. So I'll just stop there. Again, just to reiterate my appreciation for the way all the work the council staff has done and the way that the council body has embraced this topic.
Thank you, Susan. Lynn Metis.
Thank you, Chair Grelnick. Most of what I was going to say, others have already said, but want to echo the appreciation to Kelly and Merrick, especially reaching out to the states to see what we already do. And while our agencies do require training, I suspect what I get in Oregon is slightly different than what Heather gets in Washington and what John gets in California and what Susan gets at the NIMS. So having some sort of consistent training, yeah, it'll be a little duplication for some staff having to take it at the state level, but also taking it here. That way, everybody is aware of the same standards, the same ground rules. And I think others have mentioned that this isn't a one and done thing. This is something that we are going to have to continue to work on. It's going to be an iterative process. Information and this field in general is changing rapidly. So I hope we do continue to work on this, but again, appreciate the work that especially Merrick and Kelly have done in getting us going and moving on this.
Thank you. Let me just say it's regretful we have to go through this training, but it's the human nature, I guess. Corey Ridings.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. A lot has been said. I have some draft guidance if that's helpful at this point.
Yeah, I think that we've had a lot of discussion. I think we're kind of on the same page. It'd be nice to see those words on a page. So.
Thanks, Sandra.
So please go ahead when you're ready.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. This is just some guidance that I hope can build off of the staff report that was provided to us and the discussion that we're just having now and the reports of the advisory bodies. I just want to echo others and say thanks to the council staff for that, especially Kelly. And just noting that this paper was based on, as she noted, a review of similar state and federal policies and approaches, and appreciate the states also for providing that information to her. Hoping that this can move us forward, making sure that the council process is inclusive and respectful for all people, based on the history that Pete mentioned earlier, and everything that we've heard this week and in previous months on this topic. I don't know that this work is ever done. It's always a process of self-reflection and improvement, and continuing to make sure that we're the best council in the nation. So I'll speak to what's on the screen here. Request that the executive director direct staff to update the COPs regarding protections against rude and disruptive behavior, to expand from the assigned council staff and advisory body members to all council participants as described in attachment 6, which is the staff report on recommendations for a respectful and harassment-free workplace on page 1. As Ms. Ames covered, this COP edit expands expectations around rude and disruptive behavior to all process participants. Now, I agree with Mr. Anderson's earlier comments and edit regarding removal of the word repeatedly. 1B, modify the intent to serve form to ask advisory body members to commit to following the procedures outlined in the COP and in the harassment procedures policy as described in attachment 6. Page 2, as modified by the SSC report number 1. Similarly, as Ms. Ames described, this edit would add to the intent to serve form, thus that incoming AB members are required to review the COPs and the harassment policy. I think council staff should also investigate ways that this update could also be signed or at least reviewed by existing members, ensuring that they're held to the same standard. Seems smart to me. It's also likely a good touch point and reminder, as we've just discussed on the floor. Repetition is good in this process. Also note the SSC suggested an edit to change council-funded travel to council-related travel. 1C, modify the decorum section of COP1 to include language that addresses harassment and retaliation, as described in attachment 6, page 3. As suggested, this is an edit that just adds the new harassment policy to the decorum section of the COPs. 2, adopt overarching draft PFMC advisory body ground rules as described in attachment 6, page 2, for all advisory bodies as modified by the supplemental SAS report 1. As we've heard today, having shared ground rules will help create a culture of respect across all of our ABs. The SAS report suggested modifying the last bullet in the draft ground rules from moderate the length and number of times an individual speaks to allow for a balance of time. This seems like a good edit to me, to allow some discretion at each AB and sort of the individualism that exists there, while making sure that everyone has a chance to speak and have their viewpoints heard. 3, request that all advisory bodies develop committee-specific operational guidelines. As noted in the report, as some advisory bodies have already begun to do, ask our ABs to document the unique operations and culture of each AB, thus that there is an opportunity for reflection. All participants can learn and repeat the committee norms and be part of welcoming new process participants into the room. I think this can also facilitate shared learning and sharing between the ABs. And I work on the staff idea of posting on the website or posting in the ABs rooms as these develop. Also, I would recommend that assistance is offered to these groups from council staff and any experts the council might bring on in this process to help with this group. As just stated, some have already begun this process, but I think as the groups potentially move forward with this work, expert assistance is valuable. 4, add examples of harassment to the council harassment policy via a new attachment. This suggestion was made by the tribal report from March 2023 and supported by the advisory bodies. Number 5, request that NIMS, NOAA, or the Department of Commerce continue to coordinate with council staff and provide experts to advise and work with the council and council staff as recommended and described by SSC Report 1. To ensure that all council harassment and respectful workplace policies and trainings are comprehensive and consistent with currently accepted norms. I think we've talked about this, the SSC recommendation to bring in expert support. This was supported by other ABs, and I believe I'm echoing Mr. Oatman here. I think this is a good reminder that we are experts on fish and fisheries, not on HR, harassment, or necessarily workplace professionalism. But there are other people who are probably at other meetings right now who are experts talking about this, and let's talk to those folks. 6, explore and report back to the council regarding further trainings on harassment prevention and reporting for council members, staff, and advisory bodies. We've heard from several ABs and previous discussion about the value of trainings. I think it's worth noting asking the members of council and ABs to take the implicit and explicit bias test and trainings is helpful and is also a really good opportunity to do your own professional growth. Additionally, bystander intervention training will improve the ability for everyone who is able to receive it and promote a safe and productive meeting environment. And I think I'm echoing Pete's comments here about figuring out how to move this forward and shaping trainings that really fit our needs, and some of the comments we've heard about the CCC moving forward with this work as well. Also, as Ms. Brock noted, all Oregon State Board and Commission members are required to take annual trainings. I think Mr. Ugaretz pointed this out as well, that these have been helpful and help prevent discrimination and harassment. And yeah, just echoing multiple comments that the repetition of these trainings is valuable. I also wanted to echo Mr. Ugaretz's thoughts, and I agree with the value of in-person trainings. And I see the value of those in-person trainings potentially happening either here on the floor or during council meetings, and that they are a way of being inclusive of our public and extending some of those values and cultural norms out to the public who otherwise would not be able to participate in these trainings. 7, develop a process for anonymous reporting to further reduce barriers to reporting and allow council staff to track patterns of inappropriate or unwelcome behavior. The tribal report recommended this in March. We heard this from our ABs and also from Susan just now. Anonymous reporting is an important option. I know personally that both of my employers offer it, as does the National Fisheries Service, and will offer an avenue beyond official reporting for those who are experiencing harassment or unprofessional behavior, and gives them the ability to provide input to the larger process and ideally receive support, and can be helpful for them to understand if they want to make an official report or not. I think this is also a moment to echo Susan's comments on new and young folks coming into the process. I think all of us want to make this space as unintimidating, safe, and welcoming as possible. And I think that anonymous reporting can help us do that. 8, explore improvements to the reporting process and outcomes of investigations. The tribal report from March spoke to the need for diversity in the identities of the people to whom participants are supposed to report harassment. The council leadership here and elsewhere has largely been white, male, cisgendered, straight, and often the victims of harassment are people who don't fit these identities. The Habitat Committee also requested to have more clarity around the consequences and accountability for violations. And I'm pretty sure I heard this from Mr. Oatman earlier. I think exploring what this could look like and how to communicate it with the family would be valuable. 9, explore a code of conduct that applies to ABs and MTs, council members, council staff, and the public. I think it's important to explore how all council participants can attend meetings, knowing it will be a safe and respectful working environment. As Ms. Brock responded to Ms. Fenson's question earlier, there will always be a balance between encouraging difficult and contentious discussions while remaining respectful. But it is exactly what the council process and participation by AB members and the public is so critical to what we do. Sharing and learning makes a better product at the end of the day. Disagreement and compromise is hard work. And I think that as a council, we want to encourage it, and we can encourage it by doing it well, because it is the absolute crux of what we do here. I think that a code of conduct could help us do that even better and get us there even better. And 10, draft a statement of intent to protect those who are most vulnerable, for example, historically marginalized people, and to increase retention of these individuals by providing both institutional support and a safe workspace culture through this initiative. I think, as we heard earlier today, it's important for the council to publicly acknowledge how this is intrinsically linked to diversity, inclusion, and retention. This was noted by the STT and talked about by Dr. Safiq. Exploring a statement of intent to recognize this would, I think, help us address that. Regarding timing, I'm not sure that we need timelines at this point. My thinking was just to give flexibility to council staff in hopes this would be done as soon a time as practicable, recognizing it's important to the council and stakeholders. And I think I will just quote Mr. Anderson by saying, hopefully it won't take not too long. So.
All right, thank you, Corey. So you have captured some recommendations, some guidance, and I want to look around the table and see if there are any additions, subtractions, comments on this. Lynn Mattis.
Thank you, Chair Grelnick, and thank you, Corey, for putting this all together. I appreciate you working on that to get it written down. What's there seems to reflect all the guidance we've been hearing from our ABs and from our guidance around the table here this morning. I don't have any comments or edits at this point, but just express the appreciation for getting it written out for us.
Krista Svensson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Corey, for the thorough outline of what I think is a very appropriate path forward. I am also appreciative of the statements around anonymous reporting. I know that it can be a difficult topic because there's always concern in terms of what happens if somebody reports anonymously and how is that handled. And I am appreciative particularly of the points around that, of developing a process so that it is very clear to the person that is reporting anonymously what is going to happen and what that entails, but that it is also very clear to people that if a report is made anonymously about them, how that is followed through and how they can appropriately respond to that. So thank you for the thoughtfulness and the thoroughness. And I fully am appreciative of moving forward this way.
Vice Chair Pettinger.
Deal with anonymous reporting. What would the body do with that? I'm just kind of curious, kind of in line with what Krista says. I mean, I look around the table and I see a lot of diversity around the table. I mean, we've got, this is historically, it's been dominated by white males. I would say it's probably fairly accurate, but that's not the case today. So deal with anonymous. I mean, I don't like that aspect of it, but I guess it's fairly common. I guess National Fisheries Service has that, according to what Corey has brought up. I wasn't aware of that, but given that, what would the council do with an anonymous complaint? Like, I'm trying to understand where is it hidden away? Would it be addressed, right? Because my thing is I think if there's an issue, you address that issue, you go to that person, if something comes up and you fix that and don't let it linger. I'm just kind of curious what would happen if you got an anonymous complaint. What would be the action from that? I'm just trying to help me guide me through how that would work.
Butch Smith.
Great job. So Ms. Writing, and I'm going to support this motion, but having a couple different public lives, the first bullet there, rude behavior, and I totally agree with that, but the courts have supported rude behavior as free speech and First Amendment. And I just don't want to change the motion or anything, but I think we want to make sure have some, some definitions or some grounds of what we consider rude behavior. I witnessed some pretty rude behavior on TV at school board meetings this last year, and they ended up being protected by free speech. And I just want to make sure we're covered, not changing what you said, but I think maybe look into it with our lawyers or whatnot to make sure we are on solid ground. If we do cut someone off or do whatever, what we consider rude, somebody might be considered free speech. And that's all, but I am supportive of this motion and I will be voting for it. So thank you.
All right. Corey Writings and then Lynn Metis.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Butch, thanks for that. I was just going to very briefly respond. The SSC did note something similar to that in the report. I just pulled it up. It says, for example, academic institutions have experiencing distinguishing between academic free speech and inappropriate behavior. So certainly as part of this, hopefully we'd get a chance to look at that.
Lynn Metis.
Thank you, Chair Grelnick. To what Vice Chair Pettinger was bringing up about what happens, I think that this what some of the advisory body reports and what this is trying to get at is we need to develop that and figure that piece out. I don't think that piece is there yet, but it's something we want to continue to work on. At least that's the way I have seen this and the discussions I've been having. So I think we're all there with you. We don't know what happens yet, but we need to figure that out as we move forward.
All right, well, I'm not seeing any other hands at this point. We've got some very thorough guidance. Thank you to Corey Ridings. And let me just see if there are any last comments on this portion of the agenda. And I will turn to our Deputy Director to see if we have provided adequate guidance.
Yes, thank you, Chair Grelnick, and thank you, council members, for a really thoughtful discussion on what can sometimes be challenging issues. I really appreciate the attention and the clear guidance. I think we know how to proceed, and we will do so as soon as practicable.
All right, terrific. Well, I think that concludes agenda item C7 and takes us to most everyone's favorite agenda item, which is agenda planning. And for this, I'm going to hand the gavel over to Chair-elect Brad Pettinger, much to his surprise, I'm sure, because because I'll probably have to slip away before the end of this agenda item.
Okay, thank you, Chair Grelnick. And with that, I'll turn to Executive Director Merrick Burton to take us off on this.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. Let's see, this is the agenda item C8, future council meeting agenda and workload planning. This agenda item is intended to refine general planning for future Pacific Fishery Management Council meetings with a focus here on finalizing a proposed agenda for the September 2023 meeting in Spokane. We have a couple of attachments that were included in the original briefing book, both the YAG and the preliminary, what we call the September QR agenda, the quick reference agenda. You should also have some supplemental versions of both of those as well. So what we'll do here is what I would recommend anyway, Mr. Vice Chairman, is happy to answer any questions, and then I'll walk you through the supplemental attachments and then take advisory body reports.
Okay. Question, Merrick on his overview. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. So you should be referring to agenda item C8, supplemental attachment 4 and supplemental attachment 3. Attachment 3 is the year at a glance. I'll start us off there with the relatively big picture, and then we can walk through the QR agenda and then hear from the advisory body reports. Starting with the YAG, if we look at September, which is also on the QR agenda, there are a couple of things to note. We have limit entry fixed gear follow on and fixed gear marking. That's a work plan and range of alternatives. We spent some time discussing that here this week. We've also been talking about the trawl catch share project. We'll have a final report from Mr. Brandon on that in September. And that also overlaps very closely with our trawl program review. And so that discussion about that item and the next steps on it and how it relates to the trawl catch share program review and interallocation review go together underneath that item. Going down through HMS, we have a couple of matters that are still shaded. That's the OPA stock considerations, the drift gillnet transition and amendment scoping, and that may start to intersect with the workshop concept that we discussed yesterday. Also of note, in September, we're planning to take up EFH on HMS. And so what we're scheduling there is SSC review of that analysis and then asking you all to develop range of alternatives and the PPA at the same time. Moving down, the next thing of note here that may be different from the last time you looked is on Pacific halibut. So what we have there is a discussion regarding the 2024 fishery. You may recall that we had been scheduling the 2024 and the relatively longer term holistic view of things at the same time. And due to competing agenda topics, we've proposed pushing off the long-term discussion into a 3-meeting process that begins next year. Moving down through the other items, We've struck the regional recusal determination procedure handbook. My understanding from NOAA GC is that it's not quite ready. We also have a MSA confidentiality proposed rule. We understand the Chumash sanctuary designation documents should be ready at that time, and we've unshaded marine planning. The other things to look at throughout the year at a glance summary. In November, we'll start talking again about the Klamath Dam removal. And so there are two items there. One is an update regarding the dam removal itself. The other is the first progress report on the Klamath working group that we have spent a couple of times talking about here over the last 2 days. Let's see, we've added the regional recusal determination procedure handbook to November. If you look out through March, the Klamath topics come up again in March. And I don't believe, let's see, there aren't any changes then until we get into June, where we add the Sacramento workshop, or working group report rather. And then, like I already indicated, the long-term, more holistic view of halibut comes up beginning next June. So those are the changes to be aware of in the supplemental year at a glance summary. Now, if I can turn your attention to the proposed QR agenda, we have a couple of things to make note of. First, if you look across the bottom, again, these are our advisory bodies and how we're proposing to staff and schedule them. So beginning on Thursday, we're scheduling a SSC groundfish subcommittee. We have quite a number of stock assessments to begin working through. And so adding that groundfish subcommittee there is for that purpose. On Friday, we've moved a few things around. Like we discussed earlier in the week, we will expect to drop the legislative committee. Just given the summer recess, we don't expect legislative matters to come back before the council in September. And in its place, what we've scheduled is a in-person meeting of the EEJ committee. And that is because of the NIMS geographic strategic plan and the regional EEJ implementation plan, which was a focus for that committee when it was formed. And you'll also see that the EWG has been stricken, and instead they'll be meeting on September 5th. So moving across the week, you'll see the rest of the advisory bodies as scheduled. So in bold means that they are in person. We've also kept 3 days of HMSAS and HMSMT. Some of the thinking there is that we would have this combined meeting that we discussed yesterday about workshop planning. And so they would be meeting for 3 days rather than what might be 2. And one of the days would be spent on that topic. Let's see, moving to the full council agenda up at the upper section of the agenda. Again, we have Pacific Halibut on Saturday, which is a slight change, looking at the preliminary catch sharing plan in 2024 and beyond is what it's titled. Moving through Sunday then, one item to flag for you that I flagged on the year at a glance summary is the limited entry fixed gear follow-on and fixed gear marking work plan and range of alternatives. We'll be taking up a variety of marine planning related matters on Monday, starting off with the coral planting from the Office of National Marine Sanctuaries. We'll have a marine planning update. We expect there to be wind energy areas we expect from BOEM at that time off of Oregon. We expect the Chumash Sanctuary designation documents to be available at that time. And again, the proposed rule for MSA confidentiality. So that, aside from the MSA confidentiality rule, that is essentially our marine planning day. Moving on to Tuesday, another couple of new items, the NIMS geographic strategic plan and the regional EEJ implementation plan. Again, that would be taken up by the EEJ committee on Friday, and then the report would be made available to the council by Tuesday. Moving down then, we begin some groundfish matters, or continue with some groundfish matters rather. The trawl cost project, like I discussed earlier. Moving on to Wednesday, we have the advance notice of proposed rulemaking regarding national standards 4, 8, and 9. and also the National Standard 1 technical guidance. You may recall, which seems like ages ago at this point, NIMS headquarters did give us a presentation earlier this week on the ANPR. This would be a time for us to formulate thoughts for a letter back to headquarters regarding that ANPR. And then the bulk or our HMS matters would be taken up later that day. And what you see is a series of topics. One that you may want to consider is I-4, currently titled DGN Transition Planning and Amendment Scoping. Based on the discussion yesterday, my question to you right off the bat is whether we should consider that our workshop planning item rather than calling that DGN Transition Planning. And we have a couple others that I've already referenced, like EFH and OPA stock considerations. And then that would bring us to the final day, which should look pretty typical. So I'm happy to take any questions about that overview and the summary of the supplementals, Mr. Vice Chairman. Otherwise, I recommend taking advisory body comments.
Okay, questions from Eric? Lynn?
Not sure if this is appropriate now or more for discussion. Just trying to understand why the two halibut halibut items have been combined. It's already confusing, as we saw earlier this week, what's in play for 2024 and what's for future. Having it as a combined item, I think, is going to further that confusion. I can save that for more of discussion, but I was just wondering why they've been combined.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. I would refer you to the year at a glance summary, Ms. Mattis. So if we look at Pacific halibut in September, we have the 2024 commercial regs and the catch sharing plan. We've titled it and beyond. Perhaps we should strike that because what then you'll see is in June, we have what's called the long-term catch sharing plan and commercial fishery reg changes. And so those are different titles. And I think this is what you're getting at, the short term for next year versus the longer term holistic view. We actually view them as separate. So maybe there's just a wordsmithing matter there.
I just, so we temper expectations about what that agenda item is going to be in September is all I'm trying to make sure we're doing. So thank you.
Thanks, Lynn. Anyone else? Okay. With that, we'll go to reports and Abby Moyer, the GMT. Is she online? Okay. Abby, are you there? We can't hear you. Okay, we'll come back to Abby here. Go to the GAP report and Susan Chambers. Susan?
Good morning, Mr. Vice Chair.
Good morning. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, council members and Mr. Vice Chair. My name is Susan Chambers, and I will be reading the GAP report into the record. The Groundfish Advisory Panel reviewed the draft agendas in the briefing book under this agenda item and offers the following recommendations. Referencing the draft September 2023 agenda, we recommend convening a GAP webinar immediately prior to the September in-person meeting to cover items such as the halibut catch sharing plan, which is an item of great importance to the GAP and has a quick turnaround time for a report. The limited entry fixed gear follow-on gear marking item, the 2025 to 2026 harvest specifications and management measures, and possibly some administrative items. These webinars facilitate the development of timely, comprehensive GAP reports. Number 2, unshading or scheduling the marine planning item for September. Several actions related to offshore wind are pending and could be ripe for public discussion and comment and subsequent council action in September. Mr. Burden noted this will be on the September agenda already. Unshading the long-term Pacific halibut catch sharing plan agenda item, as evidenced by significant GAP and council discussion, including public participation at this council meeting. It is clear there is a great deal of interest in this issue. Again, this has been added to the supplemental agenda. And regarding G6, the trawl cost project report, and G7, the trawl catch share program and intersector allocation review scoping items. These are currently shaded, but the GAP understands these are somewhat connected, and scoping for the review may depend on the progress made on the trawl gear switching issue earlier this week. Regarding the year at a glance, the draft agenda, the GAP suggests, similar to our recommendation related to halibut for September, the GAP suggests the long-term Pacific halibut item be unshaded for November. Again, there is significant interest in the topic, and thank you for the clarification for June for the FPA in November. Unshading the LE fixed gear agenda item for March, the GAP understands this may be split into two actions, gear marking and follow-on actions, depending on the decisions at this meeting, and can provide suggestions in September on how to proceed. These items are a priority for the GAP, and we would like to see progress. Lastly, scheduling a scientific and statistical committee groundfish subcommittee workshop to analyze potential closed area data gathering of large spatial closures. The GAP suggests conducting this workshop as soon as possible in order to have the workshop results in time to be incorporated into the next stock assessment cycle. For reference, please see the SSC's March 2023 Groundfish Subcommittee Report 1 under Agenda Item F6, Final Assessment Methodologies. The GAP also recommended this in our April 2023 GAP Report 1 on future workload planning. Mr. Vice Chair, that concludes my report, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Susan. Questions on the GAP report? Okay, seeing that. Thank you, Susan. Go back to the GMT report. Abby, are you available?
I am. Can you hear me this time?
We can. Welcome.
All right. Thank you, Vice Chair Pettinger, and good morning, council members. For the record, my name is Abby Moyer, and I'm reading Agenda Item C8, Supplemental GMT Report 1. The Groundfish Management Team reviewed the draft year at a glance and the draft September agenda contained in the advanced briefing book, as well as the status of ongoing projects and offers of following for consideration by the Pacific Fishery Management Council. The GMT thinks that the agenda items for September are well placed, and we have no suggestions on moving items. The team appreciates that we are scheduled to start meeting on September 8th and recommend the council schedule the team for a pre-meeting webinar to front-load items ahead of the meeting. The GMT requests that the council identify any items in particular they would like the GMT to prioritize and comment on. Members of the GMT will also be participating in a number of ancillary meetings and work sessions outside of council meetings over the next several months, both as members of the GMT and as part of their other duties. A non-comprehensive list of these meetings is found below in Table 1. The GMT notes that we will be engaged at the September mop-up panel meeting, even if no assessments go to the mop-up panel, since a rebuilding analysis for quillback rockfish off California will be reviewed. And that concludes the GMT report.
Thank you, Abby. Questions for Abby on the GMT report? Okay, seeing none, thank you. Next up will be the CPS management team report. I guess, Jesse, you're going to do that?
Good morning, Mr. Vice Chair, council members. Yes, I will be reading the CPSMT report into the record. The CPSMT reviewed the draft September and year at a glance and offers the following for council consideration. The CPSMT is not currently scheduled to attend the September council meeting, but anticipates holding an online work session in August to develop relevant reports for ecosystem and administrative items. The CPSMT is not scheduled to attend the November council meeting in person and plans to hold an online work session before the November 2023 meeting to address CPS items and/or items relevant to CPS on the November agenda.
Thank you, Jesse. Questions on the CPS management team report? Okay, thank you. Next will be the SSC report. Dr. Dan Holland. Dan?
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the council. Dan Holland, Chair of the SSC. I'd like to read Agenda Item C8A, Supplemental SSC Report 1. The SSC report on future council meeting agenda and workload planning. The SSC discussed workload planning and has the following updates to its April 2023 statement under this agenda item. The SSC recommends holding its September meeting in person. The SSC will participate in 2 remaining stock assessment review star panels for the groundfish assessments in July of 2023, with participation from the SSC Groundfish Management Team, GMT, the Groundfish Advisory Panel, the GAP. The SSC plans to hold star panels as in-person meetings with web broadcast to allow for remote public comment. Groundfish Star Panel 2 for black rockfish will be held July 10th through the 14th, 2023 in Santa Cruz, California, with Dr. John Budrick as chair and Dr. Joseph Powers and Dr. Yang Chen as CIA reviewers, and Dr. Martin Dorn as an additional reviewer. Groundfish Star Panel 3 for Petrale Sole and Canary Rockfish will be held July 24th through 28th, 2023 in Seattle, Washington, with Dr. John Field as chair and Doctors Joseph Power and Martin Cryer as additional CIE reviewers, as well as Dr. Kristen Marshall of the SSC Groundfish Subcommittee. The SSC recommends holding SSC GFSC meetings to prepare harvest specification recommendations in August 2023 as webinars. The SSC recommends 2 meetings, with the first held on August 14th through 15th, 2023, to address the first 2 star panels, as well as catch-only projections, and the second on August 28th through 29th, 2023, to address the 3rd star panel, the Sablefish Assessment Update, and any outstanding items informing the harvest specification deliberations at the September council meeting, both with participation from the Groundfish Subcommittee members and representatives of the GMT and GAP. The SSC Ecosystem-Based Management Subcommittee recommends scheduling a meeting with the Ecosystem Work Group and the Ecosystem Advisory Subpanel to review the proposed risk table approach and 2 pilot risk tables being developed under the New Fishery Ecosystem Plan Initiative as a webinar in September or October of 2023. The SSC will participate in the Groundfish Mop-Up Panel if needed, September 25th through 29, 2023, at a place to be determined, with participation from the Groundfish Subcommittee members, the GMT, and the GAP. The SSC recommends holding a salmon methodology review in October 11th through 12th, 2023, with the participation from the SSC Salmon Subcommittee, the Salmon Technical Team, and the Model Evaluation Work Group. The meeting will be in person, but the time and place is yet to be determined. Proposals include Portland, Oregon, or Sacramento, California. The SSC Coastal Pelagic CPS Subcommittee recommends holding a meeting in fall of 2023 to review accepted practices guidelines for CPS stock assessments, with participation from the CPS management team and the CPS advisory subpanel. The SSC Economics and Groundfish Subcommittees recommend holding a groundfish methodology review of the Stablefish Trip Limit Model in September or October of 2023 as a webinar with participation from the GMT. The SSC will participate in a star panel for the Pacific Sardine Stock Assessment in March of 2024 to be held in La Jolla, California, and chaired by Dr. Andre Pont, with participation from the CPSMT and CPSAS. The Council Coordination Committee's Scientific Coordination Subcommittee meeting, SCS8, will be hosted by the New England Fishery Management Council and will be held the week of August 26, 2024 in Portland, Maine. At least 2 members of the PFMC SSC are expected to attend. The SSC recommends participation in the next Sablefish Management Strategy Evaluation Workshop in 2024 at a time and place yet to be determined, with participation from the SSC Groundfish Subcommittee, the GMT, and the GAP, and possibly SSC Economic Subcommittee. The SSC proposes holding a workshop to develop alternative harvest control rules for spiny dogfish in 2024 at a time and place to be determined. That concludes the SSC report, and I'd be happy to take questions.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Questions on the SSC report? Okay, I think you'd be very busy, Dan, by the looks of that. Okay. All right, next up will be the CPS Advisory Subpanel, and Mike Okoniewski. Mike, welcome.
Good morning, Mr. Vice Chair, council members. I'll be reading from agenda item C8A, Supplemental CPS AS Report 1, June 2023. Coastal Pelagic Species Advisory Subpanel Report on Future Council Meeting Agenda and Workload Planning. After reviewing the proposed September agenda item C8A, Attachment 2, the Coastal Pelagic Species Advisory Subpanel, CPSAS, may have a pre-September webinar to discuss ecosystem and administrative items. Additionally, the CPSAS still recommends meeting virtually only for the November meeting, given a few CPS agenda items, and recommends meeting in advance of the November meeting. With regards to the year at a glance, agenda item C8A, attachment 1, the CPSAS continues to be concerned about sardine stock structure and associated issues and recommends the council add this to a future meeting as expeditiously as possible. This is an important issue to the California wetfish and live bait industries. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Questions on the AP report? Corey Ridings.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Thanks, Mike. You know about CPS continues to be concerned about sardine stock structure and associated issues and recommends the council add this to a future meeting as expeditiously as possible. Can you share a little bit about the discussion that's behind that urgency?
Well, thank you through the chair. Well, we've been discussing it since 2015. And the problem is we have a stock structure that overlaps, and we are overfished in the northern stock, or so we think. And we have this mixture when we're managing more or less on one stock theory. So there is no fishery for the southern stock when it comes across the border, which it's more likely to do in the event of an El Nino, and also as climate change becomes more of a fact that we're associated with in higher temperatures. This could take it all the way into the Pacific Northwest at some point. Or we could have a fishery in the Pacific Northwest, but not California. Or we could have it when it comes back, or we could have no fishery at all anywhere, which is pretty much the case now. Squid this year, as I understand it, I'm not well versed in this, is having a tough time in the marketplace. Having some sardines or other opportunity would be a blessing for these California fishermen. And the seiners up in the Northwest are part of that group at times. They come down here for squid anyway, and would like to see sardines come back, of course. So it's unraveling how we're going to manage two stocks, basically. And we don't really know where to go anymore to ask for some help. And to add to that, I've heard, I don't know what the details are, that there's now a Japanese sardine swimming off our coast, which there was a theory years ago that these things didn't really just dry up and disappear, that they moved across the ocean and then back again. So there's all kinds of complications. It's a complex behavior in sardines that's somewhat unlike anything I've ever seen before in my 76 years. So I guess we're just asking for some help. And right now, to get this on the agenda, an agenda or some advice to the Southwest Center would be appreciated. And of course, we're talking to the Southwest Center too, and we realize they're shorthanded and they've got a lot on their plate. So But I'll just say if they can afford to hire extra people and dish money in for offshore wind, they can certainly take a look at this one. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Hey, Corey, further questions for Mike? Okay, very good.
Thank you.
All right.
Have a good morning.
And that takes us to the HMS management team and Jessica Watson, I believe. Welcome, Jessica.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the council. For the record, my name is Jessica Watson, and I will be reading the Highly Migratory Species Management Team report. The team discussed the year at a glance and the draft proposed council meeting agenda for September and offers the following recommendations that are depicted in Table 1. For the September 2023 meeting, unshade the drift gillnet transition and amendment scoping agenda item and recharacterize it as a DGN transition consultation. And this is based on the council discussion that occurred under agenda item J5 yesterday. Also unshade the OPA stock considerations agenda item. To address the council guidance received under J5, the team requests the following. 1, a webinar or webinars for advanced preparation for the joint meeting with the Highly Migratory Species Advisory Subpanel in September. 2, an additional day in September for a joint meeting with the HMSAS to discuss a future meeting or workshop on the new document to replace the current swordfish and management monitoring plan. And 3, add a check-in agenda item for reporting of the joint meeting of the AS and MT on the SMMP workshop scoping to the November agenda. Also, given the overlap of the MT's membership with other advisory bodies, the team requests the council staff continue to consider scheduling to avoid overlap of AB meetings involving the same advisory body members. And that concludes our report, and I will take any questions.
Thank you, Jessica. Questions of the management team? Lynn?
Thank you, Vice Chair Jessica. With requesting an additional day, is that in addition to Monday, September 11th? So that would, right, currently the team and the AS are scheduled for 2 days before HMS comes on the floor. Are you requesting an additional day in addition to that? So starting on September 10th rather than Monday, September 11th?
Thank you through the chair. Thank you for the question. The team was originally looking not at the supplemental report, so we were asking for an additional day based on the first September agenda that was in the briefing book for that joint meeting. And I can verify really quickly what day that was scheduled for. So that was, we were looking for an additional day of Sunday, September 10th was our thoughts.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. I am wondering on the third request in terms of asking for a check-in item in November, just kind of what the discussion was around asking for that in November as opposed to September.
Vice Chair, thank you for the question. Our discussion around requesting a check-in item for November rather than September was based on our first request and recommendations to the council of unshading both that DGN transition consultation and recharacterizing that with that name item, as well as the OPA stock considerations, since both of those topics also came up during the discussion around the SMMP workshop scoping. So we wanted to have the time available to not only have that joint meeting, but also have these agenda items and discussions happen on the council floor so that we could then take all of that guidance together and bring that forward for council for additional scoping of that workshop in November.
Thank you, Krista. Anyone else? All right. Thanks, Jessica.
Thanks.
Okay, that will conclude our reports and public comments. None of those. Okay. And that'll bring us to council action. Lynn?
Sorry, Vice Chair. There's a couple of reports from ONMS in the briefing book. There's supplemental report 1 and supplemental report 2. I'm not sure who ONMS is.
Well, I think I'm looking at her. Eric?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. You'll recall earlier in the week, Ms. Mattis, the Office of National Marine Sanctuaries, which is what ONMS refers to, spoke to these reports under the open public comment, non-agenda items, to tee up this part of your discussion. So we asked them to come and speak earlier rather than bringing all this information on day last.
Thank you for the clarification. Just trying to make sure we didn't miss somebody.
Okay, thanks, Lynn. Okay, with that, open the floor, council discussion. Okay. Merrick, I'll turn to you. I mean, I think you've done a pretty good job of lining things up. Caroline.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Just doing a quick sound check.
We got you.
Thank you. I did have some comments relative to the ONMS item, but I wanted to make sure there wasn't something that Mr. Burton was going to add before I started.
Okay, he didn't.
Okay, thank you. So just sort of dovetailing off of that last comment, on the September agenda item, we currently have the ONMS item scheduled as an administrative. I'd like to propose adding to that a groundfish item, which was on our prioritized workload list. It is the Cordell Bank and Associated Conservation Area item. It is currently listed as a workload, an analytical workload is medium. However, CDF&W has been working behind the scenes quite a bit to make sure that we have completed as much as front-loaded work as we can. It's a relatively straightforward fix. It's administrative more than anything because there's some regulatory complexity in the language where there's overlapping conservation areas in one area. I've had some sidebar discussions with our friends at ONMS, and they're comfortable with the approach to combine those two together. So that's what I would propose for September, and hopefully that can be accommodated. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman, and thank you for that suggestion, Ms. McKnight. Looking at our September meeting, it is quite full, and so I think if we're going to be adding items, we'll have to be looking at certain trade-offs and whether we need to drop something, or if you have more insight than we do into H1 as currently scheduled, and you believe that could fit into a 2-hour time slot, it would be good to know your insights. If we were to take this item up, I would agree with where I think your sentiment is going, is that the Cordell Bank item that you are suggesting be adjacent to the ONMS coral planting item. Typically, we don't schedule things for anything less than 30 minutes, and that is often pretty rare. So we'd be looking at maybe an hour or so. That would put us over time for that day. So one thing that is standing out to us is the MSA confidentiality proposed rule. We don't have much insight into that and whether that would indeed come up. I'm not sure to what degree we'll be looking for council input. So one solution is to strike that from our agenda to make way for the Cordell Bank item. So that's one possibility. The other is if you have insight into some efficiencies that could be gained between H1 and the Cordell Bank item you suggested, that would be good to know.
Thank you. Yes, I appreciate all those suggestions, Mr. Burton. I would add that the addition of the Cordell Bank item for September purposes should not take more than an additional 30 minutes worth of time, which you've already identified somewhere that could be taken through that H4 item. I would also add that one comment we've heard sort of repeatedly at the start of this is under Tuesday G6's agenda item that's underlined for the trawl cost project final report and CAT share and allocation review next steps. That item has been previously identified as needing to be on pause until additional decision making for the gear switching item is completed. So I would support pushing the G6 item to some future meeting until such time gear switching decisions have been made, and therefore giving some more time and flexibility within the schedule. Those are two ways I see making room for the Cordell Bank package attached to that H1 item.
Eric?
Thank you, Ms. McKnight. So just referring to, let's see, a couple of steps here. On Monday, if we were to add the Cordell Bank item and it does take a half hour, we would be, I guess I would just look to the council and see if folks are okay going a little bit long that day. On the G6 item, there's a couple of different things to be aware of here. One is the trawl cost project will be completed. And so we would be hearing the final report on that item and the next steps for phase 2 of that work. And as part of that, what we'd like to do is just be clear on how this will inform the allocation review. So it's different from what I've addressed earlier, which is a desire to hold off on the review writ large due to until the gear switching matter is wrapped up. So I think those are two issues, and I know that's confusing, but I would not want to strike G6 at this time. That's a separate item from the pause I've asked for until gear switching is done.
If I may. So if I heard you correctly, then is there potential for G6 to be separated such that the trawl cost project relative to allocation review could be separated out from trawl program review, which needs to be delayed perhaps, thereby reducing the overall time needed for G6?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Let me turn this on its head a bit. If we were to take up the trawl cost project and a full planning development of the trawl catch-share program review, that would have taken about 3 hours. And so this has already been pared down to talk about the trawl cost project, the completion of it, the next steps of it, and how that takes place within the context of the trawl program review. So I don't think there's any more time to be gained from G6 at this time.
Caroline?
Okay, thank you, Merrick. That's helpful. It seems like we still maybe have some ability to squeeze some time out of the H4 agenda item that you identified as possibly not needed at all, which would still provide some compensating time under H1 to add Cordell Bank, if I heard you correctly.
Thanks, Ms. McKnight. Potentially, I'm actually going to look at Kelly here for a second. I know she has been in closer contact with some NIMS folks on the proposed rule development than I have been, or maybe even look to Susan Bishop to see if she has any insight on that item. I don't have a lot of clarity on it right now. I know it's under development. I know there's some questions about the timeline. Wondering if any of my colleagues over there have more insight than I do.
Kelly?
Thanks, Chair Pettinger, Mr. Burden. We did hear back this morning from National Marine Fisheries Service that there is a high likelihood that the proposed rule on Magnuson confidentiality changes to or additions to the Magnuson confidentiality rules would be out during our September council meeting.
Merrick?
So with that being said, then, like I indicated earlier, a typical agenda item, unless it's a short administrative item, we usually don't schedule for anything less than an hour. You will see a couple of matters on here that are 30 minutes, but those are the exceptions. So an hour usually exists due to the overview. I would anticipate there being a NIMS person on hand to speak to it, potentially some advisory body reports. That gets us to an hour pretty easily. So as much as I hate to be the bearer of bad news, we would be looking at a long day on Monday if we add the Cordell Bank matter. But I do see Ms. Bishop has her hand up too.
Susan?
Just a thought. My understanding, I was going to just confirm that on Wednesday, item 8I4 had been sort of revised per the discussion on J5 to be DGN transition update rather than scoping. Was really originally scheduled, it looks like, for 2 hours. If it's an update, it would probably my understanding is be more likely an hour. There is an agenda item on Wednesday morning under H administrative, and would that buy the hour that you're looking for?
Thanks, Susan. Eric?
If I'm following correctly, so the I4 is, you'd be looking at a different title that is an update, and your impression is that that would take an hour. And if so, that drops Wednesday down to 7.5 hours and gains us 30 minutes. So the trick would be in moving things around to gain us time on Monday with that additional 30 minutes. I don't have a magic wand right now, but it sounds like that would gain us a little bit of time if that's your main point.
Okay. Lynn?
Yeah, thank you, Vice Chair Pettinger. Wanted to address the items that were in the HMSMT report to show support for their request to, we've already, I think it just addressed the DGN transition consultation. They also requested that we unshade the OPA item and be supportive of webinars for the MTE and the AS to meet separately and jointly in preparation for September. I'm sure council staff will need to check with hotel, see about hotel availability to add a day to the MT and the AS for that joint meeting that they have requested take place on September 10th. And then as we start to plan November, add a check-in item. I'd be supportive of those items that the HMS MT requested.
Okay. Eric?
Yes, thank you. I don't have off the top of my head the room block list. I would note, and I think you made note earlier, we already have 3 days scheduled for HMS and AS and HMS MT, and 1 partial day of agenda topics, many of whom I wouldn't imagine there being much to comment on. So I guess my response is I'll take that under advisement, and I would ask for the latitude, if we look into this and can't justify that extra day, that we be cognizant of our expenses and continue to hold that as 3.
I concur with that latitude. Thank you, Mr. Burden.
Thank you, Lynn. Anyone else? Krista?
I'll just say that I'm supportive as well. I think we heard a lot of testimony this week and had a lot of discussion this week about what that path forward looks like, and unshading both of those agenda items would be helpful. I'm also supportive of the November potential add-on and the flexibility for our executive director. Just being mindful of, if we're asking people to meet in the margins on something that isn't in the margins, that we make sure that we do build in that bit of extra time that we might not otherwise, but certainly not advocating that we need an extra day. I will say we should leave that to you, but just putting a pin there.
Thanks, Krista. Eric?
I'd just like to go back to make sure I'm not on a different page from the council here. So where I think we're leaving things is that Monday would be a slightly long day, and we would add the Cordell Bank matter. That's what I'm drafting at the moment. And so I would envision the day flowing in a way that we go H1, coral planting, and then we'd have a new H2, which would be the Cordell Bank issue, and then marine planning, Chumash Sanctuary, and then finish the day with the proposed rule. That would get us to about 8.5 hours on Monday. Just want to make sure we're on the same page there.
I think you are. Okay. Susan?
I just had an editorial comment. My understanding from the sanctuary is that the title under H1 should be Coral Research and Restoration Plan rather than coral planting. So it's just editorial comment.
Okay. Very good. Thank you. Lynn?
Thank you, Vice Chair. I know we had a few minutes discussion about G6, and I feel like I'm playing either bingo or battleship here. The trawl catch project and the catch share and allocation review. It's my understanding from a discussion with Ms. Kent from NIMS that we have to start the trawl catch share review program. We have to start that review by November at the latest. So it's current. I think that's what this item is trying to do, is get it started. There's nothing on the November agenda. So if that item were to get struck from September, it would have to be inserted into November. I think we left it that we're keeping it on September, but I just wanted to throw that out that it's my understanding we have to start that review by November of this year.
Mark?
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Mattis. You are right. We do have a timeline that we have to adhere to when it comes to these program reviews. However, what is meant by starting them can be liberally defined. And so what we are doing is trying to make sure that we are being cognizant of that timing. And so the way that we view the Daryl Brandon cost project is he's investigating a core aspect of that review, and it will be folded into the review. And so I would actually say we have already started. That's my interpretation.
Okay, I appreciate that additional clarification. I had Keely in the back of my head reminding me of that deadline, so I wanted to make sure we were all aware of that. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? Mark? Oh, John.
Yeah, thanks. I just want to circle back to the HMS, AS, and MT request and understand that you're taking that under advisement. Right now you have 3 days, one of which they are on the floor the entire day. They appear to be requesting for an additional day on the 10th to specifically address the SMMP, which is its own topic and will take significant workload. I'm supportive of that. And it's in addition to those 3 that you're showing.
Mark?
Thank you, Mr. Egretz. Yes, I understand your point, and I have the same view.
Okay. Heather?
Thank you. This isn't necessarily a scheduling in the near term issue, but I did want to flag the comment from the GAP and their interest in a meeting with the SSC Groundfish Subcommittee on the closed area data gathering and large spatial closures. I dropped the ball in asking Dr. Holland a question about that, but I think their statement is pretty clear that they are super busy. So there's a lot of stock assessments and star panels and all of that that seems to have them very busy through the end of the year at a minimum, but did want to highlight it and make sure that that doesn't get buried, and just sort of wanted to elevate it again to highlight that request from the GAP to be in sometime in 2024.
Together?
Thanks.
Okay. Corey?
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. I just wanted to see if we could agendize the recommendation from the CPSAS to look at sardine stock structure. We heard that this is important for industry members, and we heard from Dr. Yao earlier in the week about even a new sardine coming into our waters. So looking at the YAG, I would throw out potentially November could be a good time for that.
Eric?
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Writings. Let's see, give me a second to organize my thoughts here. I appreciate the question. I would propose that I reach out to the Science Center and have them report back in November about the status of the science that will lead to informing that stock structure discussion. I think at this point where we're at is there are a lot of questions, and there's a lot of interest in defining this, and rightly so. we're in need of certain scientific products before taking up that discussion, and I'm not sure where they're at. My impression is that they would not be available in November. If that's incorrect, I think we could schedule that potentially in November, but at this time, I think it would be, seems a little bit premature to put that down from my vantage point. I may not have all the information, but that would be my suggestion.
Great.
Thank you for that. That's helpful. Thanks for offering to look into that and checking that. Would it be possible for us to have some of that information from the Science Center brought back? I'm not sure if a report is the right format for that, or just some ability to have the information from the Science Center that you're able to gather that we can address either as sort of an informational report in September or, whatever you see fit moving forward.
Mark?
Potentially, yeah. But let me have that conversation with them and we'll see what sort of information we can bring to the council.
Perfect. Thank you.
John?
Thanks, Mr. Vice Chair. Yeah, I think on that note, this sounds like something that if NIMS has staff and availability and information to share, they could bring it in the NIMS report and provide us with an update that way rather than a separate agenda item. And then we can figure out what the next steps are.
Okay, thank you. Susan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've just been asked to, as a reminder to the council, that apparently this was discussed in April. NIMS's view is that a more holistic view of CPS science needs to be reviewed next year. So I think it was flagged for next year. And in particular, with regard to sardine, it would be beneficial to wait for the benchmark assessment to be completed, which I think is maybe what Merrick was referring to.
Okay, good. Very good. Thank you. Very helpful. All right. Merrick, I think they're done with you, I think. Oh, no, I guess not. Lynn?
Sorry, one more thing that came up in our morning delegation meeting this morning, as we're doing some planning, is a request from the Marine Planning Committee to try to have an in-person meeting at some point. Don't know when that would be scheduled, but that group has only met virtually. And several members this morning said they thought there would be some benefit to being able to meet in person at some point this fall. I don't think there was a time period, but they just wanted to have it thrown on the radar. And that's it. I'm done for the day now. I don't have anything else for you all.
Okay. Eric? Susan?
Thank you. I have some other suggestions to make if the time is on the YAG.
Okay.
So I'm first of all, I'm just going to discount what I just said. And just, I realize I may not have made an official request to change the title of in September for agenda item I4 from DGN transition planning and amendment scoping to DGN transition update. I believe that's consistent with what the council has already discussed, but I just wanted to make that an official request and affirmation. And then a couple of things as we're moving out on the YAG for under salmon for November. Just a reminder to the council that we will likely be, the council will be receiving an official letter from NOAA affirming the stock status determinations for salmon, and we will likely be looking at a new rebuilding plan kickoff. We're suggesting that should be added or at least noted for November. In particular, we'll have more salmon folks there, and so people that would be interested will be there. In addition, several of our biological opinions require periodic performance updates. One of them is for Sacramento Winter Run, one is for Lower Clone River Tules, and one is for Lower Clone River Coho. So we'd like to add that agenda item to November as well. Those should be very quick Typically, they're one-pagers. We provide those to the council as a draft report. We provide time then between November and March, and then finalize those reports in March.
Okay. Eric?
Thank you, Ms. Bishop. Just a point of clarification before you go on. So the stock status determinations, I'm assuming that would be part of the NIMS report, or you would like to make that a separate agenda item?
It could be either,
Okay.
depending on the extent to, the importance of that to the council.
Okay.
They should still be very short either way.
And then could you restate the second item, please?
So the second item are requirements that we have under several of our biological opinions on some of the listed salmon stocks. So for Sacramento Winter Run, for Lower Columbia River Tule stock, and for the Lower Columbia River Coho stock, we have requirements in those opinions that we periodically report to the council on the performance, management for performance of those stocks. So for example, have they met or exceeded any of their exploitation rate caps? And in general, relative to the provisions in those individual biological opinions. We've done this twice before for the Columbia River stocks. We've provided 2 of those performance updates. This will be the first time we'll have done that for Sacramento Winter Run, as that opinion was only completed in 2018, I believe. So what we're proposing to just provide those reports to the council under the same agenda item, as they'll be very similar.
Okay.
One more request, just based on the conversation yesterday. I note that Merrick noted that there is currently a Klamath River Work Group progress report under the November agenda item for salmon. I would also add the Sacramento Work Group report. In particular, I think there was a lot of interest expressed yesterday in the workshop or potential workshop as the first step. So that would allow that work group, based on the TORs, the draft TORs of yesterday, that work group will have convened at least once and be able to report out on their discussion with regard to the workshop and the likely timing of that workshop. So I thought that that update would be useful.
All right. Anything else? Oh, Eric?
Yeah, thank you. On that, let's see. I appreciate your that suggestion. I start getting concerned about staff capacity when all of these things converge onto the same meeting. So obviously the staffing of these work groups hasn't been identified yet, but I can't imagine there's going to be too much difference across them, probably a lot of similarity. And we're all pressed for staffing resources. The motion yesterday on the SAC group talked about November or early 2024. And so we've taken the liberty of saying, let's separate the two so that we can manage the timeline rather than trying to keep them all together. If there is more of a need to time that update for next year's fishing season, that would be good to know. And if so, that's a detail that's escaping me at the moment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Burden. I do think it will be important for the council and NIMS to be aware of any substantive findings of those work groups or work as we coordinate the work of those work groups with our guidance. Next year, we typically do speak to Klamath, and those are not ESA listed species, but we do typically speak to the Klamath and the Sacramento in our guidance letter. And so it would be useful it would be a good idea for those two things to be very well coordinated and for the council to be very aware of the status of the work of those two work groups, I think.
Okay. Phil?
I note that we're at 5.8 days before those ads for the November meeting. I'm just wondering, I mean, are the, for example, the updates Winter Run and the two Columbia River pieces, what would be the downside of having those in March, given that March is a heavy salmon meeting, and we have our advisors at the March meeting, where I don't think we have them at the November meeting. I'm not sure about that, or if it is, it may be a virtual meeting. I'm not sure if a determination has been made on that. So just trying to look for ways to stretch, to space these things out so November continues to be manageable.
I don't see a problem with that. The alternative is we could include them in the November briefing book and just allude to the fact that they are there in the NIMS report, and that if there are comments, please provide those comments too, and then we'll identify a NIMS staff member for that to happen. So I think either of those options is workable.
Okay. Thank you, Phil. Okay. I'm not seeing any other hands, so Eric, are you good with what we have?
Yeah, let me just recap here. So if we start with the September agenda, we would be, first, looks like a likelihood of changing Sunday to add HMSAS and HMSMT meeting that day, but we will look closely at that. On Monday, ONMS coral planting is retitled ONMS Coral Research and Restoration Plan. That would be followed by the Cordell Bank matter that Ms. McKnight suggested adding. The other change I've made note of is on Wednesday, September 13, retitling agenda item I4 as DGN transition update, and that would be 1 hour. And of course, that would be unshaded. And the OPA stock considerations item would be unshaded. I guess the other thing to make note of is we would go ahead and unshade the proposed rule on Monday under agenda item H4. So those are the changes I've made note of on the September agenda. Is there anything that I have not captured?
I'm not seeing any hands. So.
Okay, moving on to the YAG then. Let's see here. I did make note of the suggestions from Ms. Bishop on the November agenda under salmon. So adding, I've made note on my sheet here under the NIMS report, there would be a stock status determination update or stock status determinations from NOAA. I guess I'll confer with Kelly and see if having that as part of the NIMS report makes sense or not, or whether it should be its own agenda item. We also made note of the biological opinion performance reporting and the Sacramento Winter Run issue. And then I think what we'll do is have an update of the salmon working groups, have those as either an informational report or some part of the NIMS report so that there's information in the briefing book, but not schedule an agenda item in particular. I believe that's where we left that matter for November. Let's see, and then no other changes that I've captured. So did I miss anything on the YAG?
Thought the HMSMT had requested an update on the SMMP workshop process for November, if possible.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Mattis. I think that would be appropriate. So the logic here is that let me think here. Backing up to September, there are a couple of ways to handle this. One would be the DGN transition update, and the HMSAS and HMSMT joint meeting could have a little report out there. but with that only being 1 hour, perhaps that's not realistic. The other option is to have that in November. November is quite full already, but there are several items that are shaded and may drop away as we get to the September meeting. So I guess what I would propose is that we make note of that in November. And we'll continue to look at November and find ways to try to become more efficient with time. My final question on that, you mentioned, you titled it the SMMP. I feel like we're getting away from that title. Is there a different title we would prefer to call that?
I think that November is appropriate, particularly in line with the question I asked about the management team of will you be ready essentially in September? So I think September will build and we can keep it focused in November. I also think we should expand it from swordfish. I think we had a lot of conversation about other species within the HMS complex of not necessarily saying we need to have it be the HMS FMP management plan. And I see John shaking his head, absolutely no. But I do think we need to figure out some other clever title that encompasses more than just swordfish.
Thanks, Risa. Okay. I feel we're close. Anyone else? Corey.
Thanks, Mr. Vice Chair. Maybe for the last time I get to say that. I just wanted to quickly close the loop with Director Burden. Going back to the CPSAS recommendation and the conversation that Director Burden offered to have with the Science Center in light of Ms. Bishop's comments. Just wanted to check in and see and make sure you're still willing to have that conversation. It's not appropriate for the YAG, I understand, but just looking to hopefully get that report back from you or the Science Center in the near future.
Merrick?
Yes, thank you, Ms. Writings. What I have in mind is I'm very willing to have this conversation with the Science Center. And that a report back from them on their plan for scientific development so that it would inform stock structure that might be appropriate under the November NIMS report. And that might detail some of the things that Ms. Bishop was referring to about the update assessment and how all these things come together. Does that sound fine to you?
Yes, that sounds great. Just noting, as Mike noted on the floor this morning, it's been 8 years. So just looking to make sure that we're keeping that moving forward and appreciate your efforts to do so. Thank you.
Thanks, Corey. John?
Yeah, just yes, it's been 8 years for that item. However, science takes time and the workload for these items take time. I think it is appropriate to hear from NIMS in a update in their NIMS report.
Oh, all right. I see people putting stuff away here. So, Eric, are you good?
I think I have what I need, Mr. Vice Chairman. Thank you all for bearing with us.
Okay, really good. I think there's only one thing left to do here, I believe. Someone needs to make a motion. Sure. So how we usually do this? Okay. John Rugitz.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. I move that the June council meeting be adjourned.
Okay, seconded by everybody. I'll take that all. Okay, all those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Abstentions, motion passes unanimously. Well, thank you all and safe travels and have a great summer and look forward to seeing everyone in Spokane.